Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. And stand in the sun once more. Juro walked over to Ichigo, checking his pulse and his breathing. When he had confirmed that it all was as natural as it could get considering the situation, he turned his attention towards the man. Ichigo called you Kisuke. His fists clenched. He knows who you are, doesn't he? And I think I do too. Hibiki mentioned you when we were talking. You were with the Magic Council. Kisuke looked at the mage, letting a laugh escape. A while ago, yes. I suppose some people would still remember me, especially after all the work and progress I made in my time there. Mayuri did try and keep up, but he always was inferior in many ways. He hated perfection, and yet he strove for it because he believed he would have surpassed me if he gained it. He always was a funny man. Shame Ichigo had to kill him. Juro grabbed Kisuke by his coat, his arm holding the staff rising so that the sword moved to above Kisuke. What are you doing here? Oh, me? Well, I wanted to see how my little apprentice was getting on, though he's a lot older now than when I first met him. He was so cute when he knew nothing. He still doesn't know much, but his scowl is way too serious to be called cute. I'm not in the mood for jokes. Kisuke stared back at the man, the smile dropping from his face. And what makes you think I'll just give you the answers you want? You can't threaten me. A glint of steel and Kisuke's blade slid out from his cloak, slashing through the earth arm before spinning and shattering the lacrima at the top of the staff. Juro reeled back in shock, preparing for the incoming attack he was sure to follow. One never came. He slowly lowered his guard as he saw Kisuke putting his sword away, carefully picking a bit of dirt off his cloak. You know, I already saw how your magic works. You make the earth harder. That's why that Tenkan attack was so strong. The magic packed into it combined with the density and strength of the stone makes it one deadly weapon. But of course this is close to uncharted territory. You're creating something beyond what you should be able to control, and you're having to find ways to compensate for that. Without that lacrima, you can't move the rocks properly and it becomes useless. Juro glared at the man. And you worked all this out by watching. Kisuke smirked. I'm the smartest man in the world. Show me something and I'll likely work out how it works in anywhere between minutes to weeks. Your technique would normally be in between somewhere, but I've seen a similar styled technique before in the hands of a blue-haired girl. I'm sure you're familiar with her. You're spying on Ichigo's friends. Please. I know almost everything about his life. How strong he is currently, his weaknesses and strengths, the people he would give his life for. If I was against him, he'd be in a terrible condition. I'd know exactly how to strike, and exactly how to beat him and make him hurt. Otai wasn't mistaken then. You truly did assist them. Assist? Kisuke shook his head. Assisting would imply their plan would even work. They simply provided me with an opportunity. An opportunity? Juro's eyes were almost glowing with anger. This was an opportunity? You manipulated every event here to your liking. You told them exactly how to beat Ichigo because it was an opportunity. You let them play with his head, tug him along to their plans and then turned him into a monster. Just what would have happened if you couldn't change him back? That would imply that I would have been wrong in my hypothesis. This was nothing more than a simple test today. A test? People died. They were your enemies. Why should you feel pity for them? Juro shook his head. I don't. But at least they could have died trying to pursue something they could have gotten if things had been different. You let them by the nose and left them out to die. And in case you didn't see today, some of us almost died too. Do you still see this as nothing more than a test? People almost died. Kisuke brought his fist down on his palm and smiled as he realized what Juro meant. Ah. You mean people like Urza and Natsu? Well, to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't bat an eyelash if they died on the spot. Juro rushed at the man, slamming him against a tree in his anger. Kisuke didn't try to stop him, and Juro knew why. They both knew nothing he would do would harm him, and Kisuke was using it to his complete advantage. Why? Why was this all a test? Did you get something good out of it? Is that why you did this? For some sick experiment? Well, now you're confusing me with Mayuri. Kisuk glanced towards Ichigo and Jura followed his gaze. I got to see how far Ichigo has come in power since we last met, even if I got a glimpse of it during his battle with Laxus. This helped push him to his limits in more ways than one. So you made sure he would lose. Kisuk sighed. Physical power is one thing, but I had to be sure that he would be able to one day handle failure. Failure? You know he's never lost since he gained power. Or at least not when it really mattered. He thought Gildarts killed Levi, but she was still alive in the end. He has always fought and won, or lost when it didn't matter. I wanted him to experience the feeling of despair, knowing that everything you did was useless. Kisuk looked at Ichigo sadly. I trained him too well. I should have sent him somewhere other than Fairy Tail. I should have sent him somewhere where his bonds would have been different. He and Laxus pushed each other to grow stronger, and Ichigo's growth rate is already surprising enough. He didn't get to lose then. It would have been better to have grown up with lose than to have to experience it now. So you're happy to make him feel powerless here? You're happy to play with his mind. Kisuk shot a furious glare towards Jura. I'm helping him. He'll fight harder than ever before now. He'll know what it means to fail, and he'll never want to again. I made sure he could experience this in the safest way possible because he is too goddamn strong for me to do it any other way without breaking the one line I won't cross. Because no matter what I do, no matter how terrible it may seem, I will never purposely endanger him. Jura slowly released his grip on Kisuk, backing away from the man. I don't know if you're serious or not. But I don't care anymore. Just get out of here. Not yet, muttered Kisuk, walking over to Ichigo. I want to check something. I heard your talk earlier about magic loving him. I'm surprised you had a sky magic user here. He wasn't supposed to have learned about this for a while longer. You know what caused it? Of course. But I won't say. Kisuk smiled at Jura's angry expression. Secrets have costs, and I have my fair share of secrets. I've learned so many things now. So many truths of this world, and I see what needs to be done. Some things will happen, and no one can stop them. But as long as the knowledge is kept between a few, we can delay it for as long as possible. Kisuk brought up the lacrima to stare at it, a curious expression in his eyes. Do you want to know what this is? It's what you used to reverse Nirvana. Close. It is Nirvana. Jura froze, his eyes glancing at the large structure close to them. That isn't Nirvana. Then what is it? Kisuk shrugged. A shell, a body, a form, a focuser, whatever you want to call it. But Nirvana is a magic capable of reversing things in this world. Light and dark is the prime example as we saw. This tiny lacrima holds that incredible power inside it. It was simple to reverse Nirvana because I just had to use Nirvana on Ichigo once more. If you flip a coin twice, you get back to where you started. A quick glance was given by Kisuk towards the old shell of Nirvana. I had to get Nirvana released because I needed to confirm something. I'm still working on it, but I've got enough to make my conclusion. Of course I could have done this before, but everyone would have known. I needed a distraction as well. I needed someone to take the fall. Kisuk raised the lacrima closer to his face, his expression showing childlike excitement. It's so incredible. The power held in this tiny orb. With it I could dash. The lacrima was abruptly lowered as Kisuk quickly knelt by Ichigo and placed the orb in his hands. I better not hold on to this. I'm not someone who should hold such power. I'm not right for it. And you think Ichigo is? Jura didn't mean anything when he asked the question. It was simply strange how Kisuk so readily placed the lacrima away from him towards Ichigo. He didn't expect how sudden the answer would be given. Yes. Kisuk smiled as he glanced at Ichigo. He's my precious student after all. I'm sure you've noticed how he acts. He's a much more caring individual than me. He craves power simply so that he can protect anyone and everyone close to him. It's why I can trust this to him more than anyone else. He can give it away for all he wants, so long as it is his choice. So you do let him make his own decisions. Ah, you must have misunderstood me before. I manipulated him because I knew what he would likely do. I never said I made him do those things. He has the choice to fight. He has the choice to do whatever he wants. And I'll support him no matter what he chooses. Kisuk turned to leave when he suddenly stopped, turning to look at Jura awkwardly. When he wakes, you can tell him any and all of this if you want. I don't care too much, and he properly knows half of it anyway. He's more perceptive than he seems, even if he ignores some stuff. Just tell him I only said that they existed. I didn't tell them where to find them or to do anything to them. It was just a way to get him angry. They're perfectly fine. Who? He'll know who I mean, trust me. Jura sighed. I'll do this if you answer me this. Who are you? You're meant to be a genius, but then shouldn't you be more widely known than the little we knew? Kisuk smirked. I'm a guardian angel, some could say, or at least for Ichigo I am. Some would say I'm a heartless bastard. Some would say I'm a fool. A mad fool normally. Your Yuaki, a woman I'm sure you know, would likely tell you that I'm simply a man trying to do some good in this world, and that I just don't know how to go about it. No riddles. Kisuk shrugged. I can't help it. To me, I don't care really who I am. I'm simply who I am. I don't need to ever ask myself this because I am me and no one else. How do you describe yourself if someone asks in simple terms? I will say though, said Kisuk as he turned away, that all that should matter to you is that I am Ichigo's ally. I'm sure Shinji will tell you the same if you ask why he fights with Ichigo. We don't need a better reason other than that, despite who we may be. And I know you're the same. The tension Jura had been feeling vanished as Kisuk disappeared, leaving him alone with Ichigo. He turned back to Ichigo and saw the lacrima in his hands, almost begging him to touch it. If Kisuk had felt the same way he was feeling when looking at it, the man had a tremendous amount of faith in whatever Ichigo would do. That power could have let him do anything, and he instead gave it up to someone he deemed worthy of it. He'd tell Ichigo what the man had said, and he'd let Ichigo do what he wanted with the information. Maybe he should tell Hibiki as well, just to see what more they could find out about this Kisuk Urahara. No matter what Kisuk said, his kindness had only been directed towards Ichigo when he spoke. He had mentioned Yuaki, so maybe she knew more. A man like that was a dangerous one if left to his own devices, as they had all seen today. Can you hear me? Asked Jura, tapping the symbol on the back of his neck where Hibiki had placed the one before shutting archive down. Nirvana has been stopped. Ichigo is safe. It's over. It's all over. It is, came a quiet reply, informing Jura that his message had gotten through and that Hibiki was awake and active once more. It truly was over. They had won. Protector of the Fairies. Urza paced across the field they were in again and again, practically wearing the ground away from the amount of times she had been doing this. Are they close? Hibiki turned to her, showing a weak smile. They'll be here soon enough. They all will. Urza nodded, sparing a glance around their makeshift camp. Lucy was in one corner with Gray, watching over him as the ice mage rested. Sherry was meanwhile chatting wildly with Leon, who seemed to be nodding every so often. Ren had also migrated over to them, shooting glances at Sherry every few seconds. It was kind of cute seeing one of the playboys having a crush instead of just playing around. Eve meanwhile was tapping his foot impatiently, desperately waiting for Ichia to turn up. Hibiki was close by his friend, half asleep from exhaustion. They all were worn out from the day's activities, and she prayed to everything she had heard of that they hadn't missed any group of dark mages who would attack them suddenly while they were weak. Well, they weren't entirely weak. He was still there after all. She tried to avoid glaring at the man sitting innocently on a tree stump, hating his laughter and excitement as he talked to Wendy. They hadn't said anything to one another since his declaration that he would no longer be Jelal, and it was hard to know how she felt about the man. On one hand, he was the man who had done terrible things to people and caused the death of Simon, one of her old friends. And yet the other side said he was nothing more than a baby and that he had no memories of those horrific things and instead wanted to be someone good. Wendy was happily sitting on his lap explaining things to him. She seemed happier than before, and when she had asked about Ichigo she had spoken about him in a lot more excitement than before. She wondered what had happened as she had been a lot more nervous about him when they had first met. Otai, the only member of Oration Cease left, was simply resting. He had expressed to her the desire to repent for his sins, and she had tried to offer him a chance to come back with them to Fairy Tale if he truly wished redemption. Gajeel was a fine example. The man had politely declined, however, saying that he didn't want to cause any problems for their guild. How would they even get the man into the guild anyway, as the Magic Council would likely want to arrest him on the spot? So instead he had opted to be taken to prison. He claimed there was no better way than to spend time there for the crimes he had committed. He had only asked one thing from her to do in his place: to seek out his brother for him. She didn't expect to have already known who the brother would be. Otai, his real name now told to them as Richard, was actually the brother of her old friend Wally from her time in the Tower of Heaven. She was sure she could find him easily enough, or at least the next time he popped somewhere close by. He sure seemed to like traveling after all. They had spent a large amount of time talking with one another about the funny things that Wally had done in their time together, and she believed that Richard had loved hearing the tales he never got to be there for. She was sure Wally would visit his brother in jail and wouldn't hold too much against him. A rustling snapped all of them to attention, but it was unneeded. Ichiya slowly stepped out from the forest, Natsu in his arms. She ignored the fact he was massive now to focus on Natsu's condition. He looked terrible. What happened? Ichiya shook his head. I let him go ahead so to deal with the other mages nearby. It meant he had to fight Brain alone, and then Brain became stronger and turned into a man called Zero. I got word from Hibiki saying that he was defeated at least, but not by whom. Richard shot to his feet. Zero was freed? And beaten? Hibiki nodded from his seat. Yeah. It must have been Jura, or maybe Ichigo got him while hollow-fied. Richard sat back down. I see. That is good news. So Jura got Ichigo back to normal, did he? Urza looked up to see Shinji floating above them. Good. I was worried for Ichigo, you know. Restraining an inner hollow is a lot tougher than it may sound, especially when one is that strong. Shinji dropped down the ground next to where Natsu was being placed, taking a seat by the Dragon Slayer as Wendy rushed over to him. She glanced between the two of them before Shinji shook his head. Don't worry too much about me. I'm tougher than I look. Focus on the guy not even conscious. Wendy nodded, getting to work on Natsu as the others chatted. Ichiya walked over to his students, seeing them smile happily at him as he returned. You were all okay, I hope? I saw Christina get taken down. Of course, Master, said Eve happily. We're your students after all, Hibiki added on. Ren simply looked up Ichiya and frowned. Do we need to pay for the damages? Ichiya froze, his eyes slowly widening before they rolled into the back of his head and fainted, the thought, combined with his previous fatigue, too much to cope with. The other Trimens took that reaction to mean only one thing. They weren't going to be paid much for a while. Happy flew over to Urza, Carla flying instead towards Wendy. Urza glanced at the barrier, noticing it was slowly being dismantled. How did you all get back inside the barrier? I heard you flew through the top, but I saw it shut earlier on. Happy pointed towards the large circular gate. Taoshiro let us in there. He was really nice about it. Urza nodded. I see. And where is Taoshiro now? It seems like he is taking down the barrier. Happy shrugged. He came in with us, but he stopped a while back and said he needed to check something. He did say something about removing the barrier. I see. That could mean the help we needed earlier may have finally arrived. She sighed. I guess the council will be able to escort Richard to jail as he wants, though I don't know what he'll do about him. Happy followed her gaze towards Jalel. I don't know about him either. He's been too, not Jalel. I know the feeling, she muttered. Trust me, I do. So you're all alright then? Urza turned round to see Jura slowly walking into the clearing, Ichigo weakly walking by his side with one arm slung over Jura's shoulder for support. His Bankai looked to have disappeared, returning to a normal sealed Zanpakuto on his back instead. His hand was clenched for some reason, so she could only assume he was holding something in it. It wasn't her business though, and how he looked was a bigger distraction. It looked like he was trying to show a similar expression to that of Juris. He wanted to look relieved and happy. And yet she could see something else there that he hid fairly well. A look of weakness. He honestly looked the weakest she had ever seen him at, and she wasn't talking in terms of power. It was more of a mental thing about him. Maybe it had been the hollow takeover, as that was likely to mess with his feelings a lot. Jura helped Ichigo over to where Wendy was, and Shinji quickly took over, dragging Ichigo down to his level and checking him over for injuries, relief in the man's voice as he found little to focus on. They all looked around, a rough count being done in their heads as they checked who was there. "Where's Taoshiro?" asked Ichigo faintly. Taoshiro landed next to him. "Here." Shinji turned his head towards Taoshiro, ignoring the shock people were getting from the kid's sudden appearance. He knew Taoshiro wasn't one for dramatics and would have likely been less tired than he looked right now. So he asked the question that he knew he needed to ask. "What's happening?" "Runes. A rune barrier has been set up." "How many dark guilds have that kind of skill?" asked Jura. "Few," answered Urza. "Most would likely be beaten by now if they were here or be in a different set of the Balam Alliance." "It's the Magic Council then." Richard straightened his clothes before preparing to leave. "I will go to them. There is no point you all getting caught up here today any more than you have been." "Too late for that," muttered Taoshiro. "They know we're all here. They followed me. I tried to lose them, but I couldn't lose that guy. He was too serious to let me go." Shinji sighed. "Ah. Him. He's not that bad." Taoshiro and Shinji glared at Ichigo. "Fine, he is a bit uptight sometimes." "Sometimes? I think you mean all the time." Jura coughed lightly into his hand. "I'm sorry, but who is this who's coming?" "I would prefer knowing why there are cherry blossoms here," muttered Gray, staring at the innocent pink petals floating in the wind. Ichigo slowly frowned, shaking his head. "Those aren't petals. They're blades." The petals floating in the air suddenly intensified all around them, surrounding their position completely and blocking all routes of escape. Even the sky blocked. A path slowly opened in the wall of the tiny pink blades before a man walked through it. There was a regal air to the man, as if he was a noble of sorts. He had long black hair held back by hair pieces at the back of his head, while his clothes seemed to be a less standard version of what a rune knight captain would wear. The only differences were that he had abandoned the cloak and jacket for a shiakushou top and a white haori, the symbol of the Magic Council on the back of it. The haori had some slight modifications already done to it, including having a gold trim on the edges and some small light gold tassels attached to the corners of a high collar, something that had also been added onto it. "No scarf, Byakuya." The man glanced at Ichigo in annoyance. "It isn't much of a surprise to find you here, Ichigo. And it seems both Shinji and Taoshiro are here too. And here I thought I was done with you all. Do you know each other?" asked Urza, looking between the two in confusion. An elbow hit her in annoyance and she was surprised to see it had come from Eve. "Don't you know who that is?" Eve practically had stars in his eyes. "He's Byakuya Kukaki, one of the Magic Council's generals of the Rune Knights. He's a legend even among the trainees, following the rules to the letter and ascending the ranks so rapidly despite his age. Most generals are at least twice his age. He's also a royal pain." Eve shot a glare at Ichigo before turning his attention back to Byakuya. He quickly backed away when he saw the annoyed look in the man's eyes. That signaled nothing but trouble. "Why the hell did you trap us in here, Byakuya?" Ichigo gestured towards the barrier of pink blades. "Wasn't the rune barrier enough? What, you had to use your Bankai too? Well, you do have a tendency to escape traps that I set. It is really quite a nuisance." Jura slowly leaned down to Shinji as he approached the man, glancing between Ichigo and Byakuya, who seemed to be glaring at one another when not swapping insults. "You guys have history with him?" Shinji scowled. "Yeah. We met him when training during the past 3 years. He turned up a year into training to work on his own Bankai. He said that he couldn't afford to train with the Magic Council at the current moment as it was becoming too dangerous to those around him. He was right, but he was still a real pain. He's too stuck up. So will we get in trouble here?" Shinji shook his head. Doubt it. He's a bastard, but he's still a decent guy, as much as I would like to deny it. We got lucky if this is who the Magic Council decided to send. He'll likely let us leave in peace. This is just to annoy Ichigo. Byakuya, finally finished with dealing with Ichigo, turned his attention towards the others. Otai of Oration Cease, you are to come with me to face trial for your crimes. If you resist, I am authorized to use deadly force to subdue you. Richard raised his hands in surrender, walking towards Byakuya. I won't fight. I am willing to pay for my crimes. Byakuya's eyes darted at the man for a brief moment, the only indication that he was confused. He didn't dwell on it much though. He had a job to do, and that was to take any and all members of Oration Cease into captivity. He took one look at Nirvana before turning his attention towards Ichigo and Jura. The two of you will be required to attend a gathering of the Wizard Saints within a week from now. Your respective masters should have the details for you. It is there that you will inform the Magic Council on all that occurred today, including the capture of Nirvana. Byakuya's eyes suddenly glanced to the blue-haired man who was looking extremely nervous. He had a right to be. I am also required to take Jelal Fernandez for the destruction of the Magic Council. Jelal froze, glancing around in fear. The barriers enclosed them all, and there was no way out. He couldn't fight the man, because he knew he would lose as he was right now, and he couldn't claim he wasn't Jelal when the man obviously knew that was who he had been. But he didn't want to go to jail. Not when he was starting as someone else. Not when he didn't even experience what had been his sin. He turned to Urza but he saw no help there. Ichigo was still unconscious so he couldn't expect much help there either. Juro looked at him sadly but the man made no move to help him. And he could understand why. The man still saw him as a threat, and transporting two people before disappearing was barely enough to prove his good intentions to him. Please, he begged. I'm not Jelal. Not anymore. I don't remember anything. That will not help you. A loss of memories is not a valid defense according to the council. Tears started falling from Jelal's eyes. Don't. I'm begging you. I just want to start again. I didn't choose to be Jelal. Please, just let me go. Let me start again. I don't want to be Jelal. I can't be him. Byakuya was walking towards him and he started backing away. He didn't want this. He didn't want to go jail. He needed help. Somebody. Anybody. And then Ichigo was standing in the man's path, blocking Byakuya from Jelal. Byakuya's brow crinkled in annoyance. Move. I can't let you do that. This man helped save my life. And he got me back nice and safely too. He's a criminal. And right now I see someone absolutely terrified. I'm not going to stand here and watch this. Ichigo dash. Ichigo glanced at Urza, his glare cutting her off. What? Urza swallowed the fear she was feeling from the glare, focusing on the heart of the matter. After the things Jelal has done, the Magic Council won't let him get off scot-free. And they don't exactly like us the best either. If you protect that man, you're aligning yourself with him. Are you willing to let Fairy Tail get shut down to defend this man? She's right, said Byakuya, taking a step closer. The Magic Council will leap on a chance like this. If you stand aside now, they never need to know. I'll let this act of aggression slide. But if you get in the way of the law, I'm not afraid to cut you down as well. Just go ahead and try. Some of the blades surrounding them flew off from the barrier, joining together to form a sword in Byakuya's hands. Last chance. Move. Ichigo glanced at the others, a lot of them almost begging him to stand down. He could see Wendy was conflicted, obviously from wanting him to save Jelal. Shinji however simply smirked at him. That guy simply knew him too well. If I remember correctly, there are certain loopholes for wizard saints. Byakuya slowly lowered his sword. So you intend to use that then? Indeed. Normally wouldn't be able to do such a thing but you know how desperate Juashiro was to get me to accept the deposition. He tagged it on with the last bit of authority he had before he finally ended up resigning after the whole Tower of Heaven incident. It normally just protects Shinji, but he never gave a specific number. Ichigo smirked. If anything, I think he did that because he expected me to do something like this. The barrier slowly vanished around them, the tiny blades being drawn into the one in Byakuya's hands before he returned it to a sheath on his left. You are playing a dangerous game here, taking Jalal under your wing. You won't be able to do something like this again. The old chairman's word will only grant you so much. I know. But then what is the point of being able to do something like this if I never use it when I need to? Byakuya sighed, turning towards Jalal. So long as you serve under the Wizard Saint, your status will remain as neutral. No chances will be given if you make a mistake, and anything you do will reflect onto Ichigo himself. Do you understand the terms in place? Jalal nodded, half unsure what was going on but completely overjoyed that he wasn't being taken away. Byakuya took one last look at Ichigo before turning, gesturing for Richard to follow him. We're leaving. Stay out of trouble, Ichigo. I don't want our next meeting to be me arresting you. Richard bowed to all of them quickly before following after Byakuya, the man not waiting to see if he was being followed. The only sound left was simply of crying, Jalal gripping onto Ichigo as he thanked him profusely. I'll never forget this, he muttered, tears streaming across his face. Thank you. Just. Thank you. Don't worry about it. Ichigo held out a hand to the man. Come with us to Fairy Tale. You don't need to be Jalal there. You can do as you wish. You can start over. Jalal slowly reached for the hand before grabbing it tightly. Thank you. Protector of the Fairies. This is the story of Nirvana. Ichigo tugged at the bandages around him, half wondering why they had been insisted on. He had said that they didn't need to worry, what with his regeneration and all, but Wendy had dragged Jura over to back her up. Half of them had some form of bandages around them, Wendy not able to completely heal everyone due to the urgency of Natsu's own injuries. After Byakuya had left, they had worked out what they had left to do. They were going to split up, but Ichiya, after having woken up, had insisted that they needed to celebrate their victory. Kate's shelter had been the closest to them, so they had decided to both accompany Wendy back to her guild and have their party there. As for the remains of Nirvana, it looked like it was being guarded, and possibly recovered, by the Magic Council. Byakuya had headed off in that direction, so it was likely that he was overseeing the operation. It was dangerous, a weapon like that being left in the open or even with the Magic Council after what had happened with the Etherian cannon. So it was a good thing they had the power source for it. He glanced at it down in his hands, still wondering how something so small could have causes so many problems. The energy inside it flowed steadily around the inside of the sphere, black energies mixing with white ones, just like with the pillar of light they had seen when Nirvana had first been released. Something felt strange about holding it. Something he couldn't exactly place. It was familiar, as if he had held something like this before or seen something similar to it. What are you exactly? He didn't really expect a reply. The answer wasn't one he believed he would be able to get easily. It was just so confusing. Where had he seen something like this before? Mind if I join you? Ichigo shook his head, letting Jura take a seat beside him. He took note of the slight wince Jura made as he sat, his eyes glancing at the bandages over Jura's chest. Over the wound he had caused. How are you feeling? I don't know. Jura nodded. I feel the same. On one hand we won, but it didn't feel like a proper victory in some sense. Not with Dash. Kisuk. Yeah. Ichigo took another look at the lacrima before hiding it back away in his pocket. I'm sorry. It was Nirvana's influence. You don't have anything to worry about. Sure. Ichigo held back the emotions he wanted to show. Nirvana may have caused him to change, but it didn't mean he hadn't seen what was going on to some degree. He knew exactly what he had done. He took the opportunity to see where the others were. The party was still ongoing despite it still being dark, though the sun would likely come up sometime soon. Ren and Sherry were dancing around a fire with other couples from the Nervite tribe, and they looked to be lost in their own little worlds. Hibiki was chatting intensely with Ribal, asking everything he could about the Nervites as he knew he wouldn't get a better opportunity than this. Eve had reluctantly been dragged into the conversation too, looking bored out of his mind but too polite to actually try and escape. Sitting near one of the edges of the party was Urza, even Ichiya giving her some space. He would need to try and find out at some point why she hated Jalal so much. And probably find out how much Jalal had actually done. Being away for 3 years really did make you miss a lot of stuff. She kept scowling at both him and Jalal, yet he could see her heart wasn't completely in it. She looked more confused than anything, and that was being expressed as one of the easier emotions to express. Anger. For Jalal, he was happily exploring the village with Wendy. She had been delighted to show him around, and he was just as excited at seeing everything there. Just seeing the joy on the man's face at some of the small little things around him made him happy that he had made the choice to help him. Even if Jalal had done bad things once, this mind right now was pure and innocent. Carla followed after the two, occasionally lecturing Wendy about how much magic she had used that day as if from habit. The cat seemed happy that they had stopped Nirvana though, and that Wendy had been such a big help. She was even letting Happy follow after them, not even complaining at his presence. Natsu and Gray meanwhile were devouring half the food they came across, somehow caught in an eating contest of sorts. Some of the Nervite had wandered over and were cheering them on, a few even trying to keep up before the amount of food became too much. Lucy watched with amusement from beside them, cheering on Natsu while Leon cheered on Gray. He could see Shinji staying near the edge of the crowds, slightly uncomfortable with joining in even if he could hide it. He had been a bit like that when he had joined Fairy Tail, leaving the moment he got the mark. There were few people he cared about after all, and he didn't feel comfortable joining in with people he didn't care for. He likely would have left if he and Taoshiro hadn't been around in places. Taoshiro was currently being dotted on by half of the Nervite females, desperately trying to escape as they commented on how cute he was and how he was so brave like Wendy was to help out. He even saw a few of them trying to maneuver him over to Wendy because they thought they would look like a cute couple. He would have saved Taoshiro, but it was too funny to watch. That, and he didn't want to risk being caught himself. They had already done this with Shinji earlier, and likely a load of the others when he wasn't paying attention. Jura. Yeah. How did I recover? Jura sighed, knowing what Ichigo was referring to. The whole incident with Wendy and the poison. Yeah. I honestly don't completely know. Jura glanced at Wendy in the distance. Magic was being drawn to you, but it shouldn't do that unless you have the ability to do so. You can't absorb it at the rate you were showing without having some kind of ability that lets you do so. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Because I want to be able to give you an answer to why you were able to do it. Can you honestly tell me you know why? Ichigo shook his head. I don't. I've never used something like this before. I didn't even know that I could. And that annoys you, doesn't it? Not knowing. Yes. Jura glanced at his friend. I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier. Don't worry about it. I wonder if I should have even asked. I've got too many questions with too few answers. I know the feeling to a degree, but you may be able to give me some of the answers I need. Jura glanced around them subtly, still cautious from before. Kisuke Urahara. Why is he so interested in you? Ichigo shrugged. I don't know. I've known him since I was 9 and I still barely understand why he chose me as his apprentice. Maybe it was luck. Or maybe it was because I was important to him in some way. Because of my inner hollow. Since you were 9. How did you parents react to him teaching you? He practically radiates suspicious character. Ichigo shuffled awkwardly. I'm sure my dad knows. Kisuke even said once that he knew my parents. I'm sure he doesn't mind. You're sure your dad knows? You speak as if you don't know that for sure. Well, I haven't exactly seen him in a very long time. What do you dash? Jura stopped speaking, his mind making the connection between Ichigo's words and his name. You never give anyone your surname. I'm sure you have one. Brain knew it. He almost said it. That was the final straw that set you off. Yeah. Well, I'm Fairy Tail's Shinigami. I'm Ichigo. That's all that's important. Ichigo. I'm fine, Ichigo muttered. Besides, I'm sure he knows where I am if he ever wants to see me. I've gained a bit of a reputation as you have, and it would be simple for him to come see me if he really wants to. Since he hasn't. Well, it doesn't matter. I haven't needed a parent since I was 9 anyway. Before Jura could say another word, Ichigo had gotten up and headed towards the others, plastering a fake smile on his face as he interacted with them. He suppressed everything else, not daring to think about his father. Not daring to think about the two little girls he had barely known. Not daring to think about his mother. Well, isn't this a surprise? Ichigo jumped, so lost in suppressing his thoughts that he hadn't noticed Ribal sneak up on him. When the old man escaped from Hibiki. He glanced over there but was surprised to see another version of the old man over there, still talking to Hibiki enthusiastically. How? Relax, muttered Ribal. Don't make too much of a scene. Ichigo glanced around slightly, seeing how a group of people had slowly surrounded them, blocking the line of sight most people had on them. I don't really want you to appear to be talking to yourself. I'll make people think things, and I doubt you want that. Ichigo turned back to Ribal. And what about there being two of you? Wouldn't that make people even more curious? Ribal smiled teasingly. They can't see me. The beauty of illusion magic. They can't even tell that the Ribal over there is a copy. I see. Ichigo frowned. Was that even the real you when we first met? Why don't you tell me? Ichigo scowled, turning towards where the other Ribal was. He let his senses spread out, feeling all the different sources of magic around him. And around the two Ribals was definitely a link, but was there a difference between the two? He snapped out of the slight trance when he found it, glancing back at the real Ribal. It was. That only made Ribal smile wider. Oh really? What makes you so sure? It's your magic. It's strange. Different. Ichigo frowned, a hand reaching for his pocket. His hand touched Nirvana and he frowned, his eyes glancing at the symbol on Ribal's head. That feeling. You're linked to Nirvana, aren't you? Oh. You worked it out, did you? Ichigo pointed at the man's forehead. That symbol was in part of the symbol for Nirvana. It only makes sense you are linked to it somehow. Maybe by something that was passed down from father to son. Ribal smirked in amusement. Wrong. Ichigo frowned. Then what is it? Ribal leaned in, as if about to impart a secret. Ichigo leaned down to hear only for the man to laugh loudly suddenly. Spoilers. A scowl crossed Ichigo's face. Spoilers. Yep. It'll be more fun to explain in a few minutes. It would be unfair to only tell you after everything you all did, but I did want to speak to you first. You were the one chosen to decide what is to be done with Nirvana. Ichigo froze, his hand grasping the lacrima tightly in his pocket. How did you know that? Because I can sense it. Do you mind? Ribal held a hand out, waiting. Ichigo slowly pulled the lacrima out of his pocket and revealed it to the man, careful to not let his grip loosen. He didn't know this man very well, and he wouldn't risk giving a dangerous weapon to the man. Ribal smiled as he looked down at the orb. 400 years since this was last seen. The symbol on here actually has a very unique meaning. The symbol on my forehead refers to the power while the rest refers to the shell. You can see that the rest of the symbol is currently fainter because it doesn't have a lot of power left. It can hold a lot, but it also uses a lot when it is used. So it's running out of power. Can we destroy it then? Destroy it? Ribal glanced up from the orb and looked at Ichigo in confusion. You don't. I thought you understood. I guess I was wrong. You haven't grasped it yet. It was Ichigo's turn to look confused. Grasped what? What are you talking about? Nirvana. It can't be destroyed. Surely you realized that. Ichigo shook his head. It has to be. It's too dangerous, even if I'm guarding it. There is no choice in the matter. It's not a matter of choice. Ribal sighed. You've already encountered something like this before. Nirvana. It can't be destroyed. No matter how you try, it won't vanish from this earth. No matter how hard you try, Nirvana will always exist. You can't be serious. I'm afraid I am. Nirvana. It's something different from normal magic. You must have sensed that. In fact, I suspect you sensed more than you want others to know. Because your level of awareness is higher than theirs, You are privy to secrets they can't know. Secrets they can't completely understand. I'm not sure I understand. Not yet you don't, but you will in time. So is the fate you share with all that came before you. Brilliance, at a cost. Ichigo sighed. You still aren't making any sense. A beaming smile shot to Ribal's face. I'm not am I Nabara? What's up with that Nabara thing anyway? You seem to add it on regardless of the situation. Ribal's smile dropped slightly. I've lived a long time Ichigo. I'm just trying to not forget something important to me. If I don't keep saying it, I fear I'll forget it. The crowd slowed parted, allowing Ribal to exit. The other Ribal vanished as he moved into the ground, letting the real Ribal free to move without question. He approached the fire, all of the other Nervite nearby allowing him past. They went as far to stop in their activities, their faces showing sadness. Ichigo couldn't help but get confused once more. Why were they sad? They had been happy just a minute ago. Ribal slowly approached one of the large logs that had been placed near the fire as seats and sat down, whistling loudly. All activity stopped as everyone turned to him, wondering if something was wrong. Mages of Fairy Tail, Lamia Scale, and Blue Pegasus, please join me. The mages glanced at one another in confusion before doing as the man said, taking seats around the large roaring fire. All the Nervite seemed to surround them in a large circle, not a single member of the tribe making a noise. You can join them, Wendy. Wendy jumped, glancing at Ribal in confusion before smiling happily, running over, and placing herself between Ichigo and Jalel. I would like to thank you all for your assistance this day. You have stopped the magic of Nirvana falling into wrong hands. Half the mages looked away in embarrassment, Natsu smiling widely as he called out to Kate Shelter's guild master. No problem, Gramps. We couldn't let those guys do as they wished. He's right, said Gray. We couldn't just sit back and roll over. Ribal smiled sadly at them. And I thank you for having the will to act as you did. They would have likely come here with Nirvana if you hadn't stopped them, and it would have ruined this place. They would have gone after you. Leon glanced at all the Nervite. You guys know how to seal it away, don't you? Ribal nodded. It is true. And while they would have been unable to kill me, it would have broken my heart to see such magic used for evil. The flames flickered and Ribal stared deeply in them, gesturing for the others to do the same. Let me tell you a story. He waved his hand and the flames started acting up, small images slowly being able to be seen within the flames. They could see a small group of people, slowly walking towards one another from all directions. Gather, children of light. They saw the figures in the flames facing off other flame creatures, charging towards them. Prepare yourselves and charge forward. Slowly the numbers dwindled as the flame creatures decimated those that had been fighting against them. The last of the flame people fell to the ground, his hands weakly trying to make himself stand back up. Watch the light fall and dim. And then all of a sudden the person pushed himself to his feet, his hands clutching at the weapon in his hands weakly. He was barely able to stand from the look of it, and yet he charged back at the creatures, bringing down one after the other. But don't stop moving onwards. More creatures came, but the man didn't stop. Others that had fallen struggled to their feet, joining in the battle and helping their ally. Fight back, despite the odds. The creatures fled, the people raising hands and cheering as they jumped for joy. They rushed at one another, laughing as they hugged and congratulated one another, looking as if they were boasting about their achievements and teasing others. The scene changed and they saw more people joining a bustling crowd. They had to be 10 to 20 times more people than before, and their numbers looked to be growing. Crawl out of the dark. Slowly a large village seemed to form, houses being built and shops being set up. People waved at each other as they passed, lending a hand with construction where needed. And let hope reignite for all. The peace they were seeing suddenly vanished. A large army tore through the land, killing everything in its path. They saw the village burn, people crawling away while others tried to hold the enemy back. They failed and the village was wiped out. Even if the light fades once more. As the army vanished, people slowly started emerging. A mere fraction of the previous numbers, but they were still alive. They all looked around at one another, many crying and falling to the knees as they took in the remains of the old home. It isn't gone from the world. The scene changed and showed the remains of the people reconstructing. This time they weren't constructing their town though. They could see what looked to be the buildings that rested on top of Nirvana. But the army slowly returned once more, deadlier than before as they approached the new city. Keep standing, keep fighting. The city tore from the ground, 8 legs holding it up as it took to the skies. Magic rained down from the sky at the enemies below and a great war was staged against the army. Stand against the incoming darkness. The scene changed and the people on the giant city turned against one another. They could see as families ripped each other apart, a civil war erupting across the city. Defeat those who would harm you. People from both sides fell, the death toll rising as the battle continued endlessly. They saw one man at the center of it all, a blinding force of energy around him as he grabbed person after person. Each person he touched suddenly changed to his side, defending against the attackers who were pushing towards the city's summit. Bring the light back to the surface. The sun slowly rose in the fire, the sun in the real world doing the same slightly. They saw only one man left standing, his fallen friends around him with smiles on their faces. Even the ones against him seemed to have gained a smile of sorts as they fell. And stand in the sun once more. The lone man seemed to cry before looking towards a single pedestal. He walked towards it, touching a single orb on the top of it before looking away. The scene changed and they saw Nirvana being sealed away, the man walking away from it to the old abandoned village from long ago. This is the story of Nirvana. The flames cut away with a wave of Rubal's hand, going out just as some of the light from the sun shone onto the village. The mages blinked slightly, looked at the sky in a bit of confusion. Time couldn't have passed that quickly, could it? But if it didn't, how had they missed the sun rising so quickly? It's a very special magic. Rubal glanced back at the fading embers. You see a lot more by experiencing it and watching close up. This spell takes memories and projects them into the flames, and people's perception of time slowly alters a bit when watching. How long have we been watching? Asked Eve curiously. I'd say about an hour. Well, that's not too bad. Indeed. It would have been terrible if you had been attacked during that time. Hibiki glanced at where the fire had been. That story. You called it the story of Nirvana. Those people were the Nervits, weren't they? Rubal nodded. Yes. Yes, they were. The past wasn't as nice of a place as it is now. 400 years ago was a time of endless war. And, at the same time, a place of great creations. It could be said to be one of the pinnacle times of our history. The Siriti. Everyone glanced at Ichigo. That was the home of the Shinigami 400 years ago. Indeed. That was one of the many great strongholds of that time. The Quincy had their own at that time too, and so did that man. Zeref. So that's what those creatures were, muttered Urza. Demons. Rubal glanced down sadly. I'm afraid not. Urza looked at Rubal in shock before she looked at him in pity. She knew what the creatures were now. They were simply humans. Yes. Rubal sighed, glancing around him at the mages assembled. You are all lucky in that you have these morals to do what is right. But some people. Well, they don't care. You saw them as creatures because that is the best way to express it. They didn't care if people were suffering. They just enjoyed causing pain, despite the war causing enough pain. They were more than happy to watch the world burn and to drag everyone down with them. Rubal glanced to Nirvana's shell in the distance. That's why Nirvana was constructed. It was to be a haven for the light, so that no one would ever get hurt. It would take all the darkness in the world and turn it to light. Then there would be no more war. Then there would be no more suffering. But it didn't work, said Jura. You showed that to us. Yes, it didn't work. For a time, maybe. There was a break where peace existed, but it disappeared. Light and darkness cannot be destroyed, only moved. The people back then took all the darkness they could find and gave them light in exchange. An equal balance. Tears slowly started falling, but it wasn't any of the mages crying from the story. It was Rubal. He brought a hand to try and stop the flow as he forced himself to keep talking, afraid he would never start again if he stopped. I tried. I tried so hard. But there simply wasn't enough light out there to replace all the darkness in people's hearts. The Nervite. They had made themselves so pure. I took some from them to help continue their dreams. And I even forced some of the darkness to be locked away. But one day, nothing can stay sealed forever. It broke free, infected the hearts of half the city and started a war between the people. The king rose up and led the charge to defend the city, wielding the magic of Nirvana in his hands as he turned his fallen people back to the light. The tears slowly dried up, but Rubal kept talking. But it was too late. There were too many people whose hearts had been infected. The king lost so much of his own light, and with his last breath he sealed Nirvana away and killed himself before his will broke and he fell completely. Ichigo's mind thought back to his previous conversation with Rubal. I asked if you were linked to Nirvana. You said I was right, but my reason was wrong. It was because you were there, weren't you? Rubal nodded sadly. Indeed. I was the only survivor of that great catastrophe. 400 years. Ichigo shook his head in shock. That's impossible. People don't live that long. Rubal gave them all a knowing smile. People normally don't. And I'm afraid to say that I'm not really alive here. Wendy brought up to her hands to her face, tears cling at her eyes. You're dead. Now don't say that. Rubal let out a loud laugh. I'm not really dead. I suppose I would have had to have been alive in your sense to have ever died. Leon frowned. You speak as if you aren't human. Rubal shrugged. Because in the end, I'm not. I don't understand, said Ichigo. If you were never alive, then how were you the only survivor? How are you even here speaking to us? I won't be much longer, trust me on that. A flicker of light flashed in the corner of their eyes, Wendy crying out in fear as some of the villages vanished in bursts of light. Her head shot from side to side, seeing more and more people vanish. No. Where are you all going? You can't. You can't disappear. Rubal got up from his seat, slowly walking around to the young girl. They aren't real, Wendy. Wendy's head shot round to face him. What are you talking about? I know they're real. I played with them, I trained with them, I talked with them. I saw their presence in magic. I felt their different energies. They have to be real. Rubal sighed sadly. That's because they are, and at the same time they aren't. Wendy stared at Rubal in confusion. They were illusions, muttered Ichigo next to her. Very powerful illusions. He showed one to me, having one talk with Hibiki. Hibiki shot out of his seat. Hold on, that couldn't have been fake. I shook his hand. The kind of illusion we're talking about is similar to what Jelal once did to fool the Magic Council, interrupted Jura. It is possible, but the source of magic needed for such a thing is tremendous. And the character created is normally similar to the original in how it acts. But these people were all different, cried Wendy. They can't be fake. Rubal kneeled down by the girl, reaching a hand out to brush away her tears. You were such a sweet girl. When that boy brought you here all those years ago, I couldn't help but fulfill his wish. He said you wanted to join a guild, and I couldn't bear to see you looking as sad as you did when you woke up. Rubal glanced around as the last of the illusions vanished, all of them waving as they disappeared. These people were all real. You are right in that I shouldn't be able to make copies of people so advanced as these were. Instead, I took all the memories of these people and gave them a form to take with help from my magic. I already had a rough imprint of their very souls, so I only had to draw upon the personalities they had. Ichigo's hand reached into his pocket, touching Nirvana. The king of the Nervites. You said he killed himself. But in your story you said it was you who failed the Nervite. But it can't be possible. Rubal gave Ichigo a smirk, reaching out and ruffling his head despite his age. I'm impressed. It only took you a few tries to work out. You inherited a bit of the brains your teacher had, I see. Ichigo froze. How do you ? I don't. But I sensed him when he came to me for help. He asked, and I agreed. If I had refused, he would never have been able to free you from my power. Jura's mind connected the dots as he took in the words the two were speaking. The conclusion. It was you. Ah. I don't get what any of you are saying. Rubal laughed jolly as he looked towards Natsu. There's no shame in that child. They were at the center of it all when everything came to a close. Few would understand anyway. He chuckled. I suppose I should stop speaking in riddles then. I don't have much time left. He slowly lifted a hand to his chest, smiling at them all. I am the magic of Nirvana. There was silence, no one even moving as they stared at the man. Hibiki finally broke the silence with his stuttering. Hold on. Why you can't? I mean. Eve patted his friend on the back. What I think Hibiki means is that how can you be the magic of Nirvana? Rubal held out a hand towards Lucy. Your name was Lucy, was it not? You use celestial spirit magic. What do you think? Lucy glanced at her keys before looking at Eve. What he says. It is technically possible. Celestial spirits do have a form and mind even if they are made of magic. Exactly. But that is far too rare, stated Jura. Celestial spirit magic is the only exception to the rule. The only way you could be the magic is if I achieved sentience. Rubal laughed. I am the consciousness of a magic that transcends light and darkness. I alter the fabric of the world by simply swapping the magic in it. A magic like that. Did you honestly think it wouldn't gain a mind of its own? Rubal glanced down at himself. This form belonged to my old king. He could use my magic because we were linked together by an unbreakable bond. He was the first face I saw when I came into being, and I devoted myself to fulfilling his dreams of peace. My only regret was that I failed to hold back the darkness. And in the end, I couldn't accept his death. I took his form and name so that I could remember him better. In was my way to cope, I guess. The village vanished around them, being replaced by broken houses and a ruined landscape. But in the end, I never forgot who I was. I had to remind myself often, in case I did forget. 400 years is a long time when you're all alone. So I kept repeating it. Nirvana is the name of my power, but I got to have my own name. A name Rubal gave me. I am Nibera. A body latched onto him suddenly, Wendy pushing her face against his chest. Why? Why are you telling us this? Why is everything vanishing? Because it has to, he answered sadly, patting her on the head as he returned the hug. I would have stayed around for much longer. Nirvana had so much power left in it that it could have sustained this form and these illusions for 100 years more if needed. Such is the quality of the magic held within that great lacrima, and yes, I do mean quality. But the magic of Nirvana is different. It drained me completely. I just about had enough to restore Ichigo back to his original state and hold the illusions up for that little bit longer. I'm sorry you had to find out about my deceit. Nibera looked towards Ichigo. Look after her, won't you? She's my wonderful little grandchild after all. I won't forgive you if you make her sad. What makes you think I'm the most capable person? Nibera smirked. It's your eyes. You'll care for her, I know you will. I can see why she chose you. If she hadn't, I would have tried to stay by your side. But I fear if I did that I'd upset her, and trust me, you don't want to do that. Wendy frowned, looking up at Nibera. But I want you to stay. Nibera simply responded by patting her on the head. I know you do. But it isn't you I'm talking about here. I'm confused too, muttered Ichigo. Don't worry, you won't be forever. You'll see her eventually. You must have already met her, as she already claimed you as her own. Nibera's brow crinkled. I can sense her magic on you, even if it is barely there. It's just a tiny slither of energy, but it's there. You should count yourself lucky that no one has sensed it yet, else I'm not sure if you'd still be alive. Wait, what are you? No time. Nibera winced, his body flashing as it slowly began breaking down into light. I won't die here. But I won't be the same anymore. I'm sorry, Wendy. I wish I could have stayed around a bit longer. These past few years have been so busy and stressful at times, and I wouldn't change a moment of it. No. You can't. Please don't go. Have faith, my child. I'll always be with you. Even if you can't see me. I'll never leave you completely. Nibera took one last breath, looking up at the sky above and at the sun. It truly is wonderful, being with friends. I won't forget this. Not 1 second. Nabara's remaining body broke apart and he vanished without a trace, the last to vanish being the symbol on his forehead. Wendy didn't move from her position, still gripping the air where Nabara had been. She couldn't react. The tears were falling but she couldn't move. He couldn't be gone. He couldn't. She lost her mother. She lost Jalal. And now she lost her grandpa too. And she couldn't even see a trace of his presence in the air, even with her gift. He was gone. Why? Ichigo watched as the small girl fell to her knees. Not a moment in and it already looked like he was breaking that promise to Nabara. His hand brushed against Nirvana before a burst of something ran through his arm. He glanced at his pocket, pulling out Nirvana. So that was what he meant. Ichigo strode forward, placing a hand on Wendy's shoulder as he knelt down to her level. Her head slowly turned to meet his as he took one of her hands and placed Nirvana in it. Wendy stared down at Nirvana in shock. This is Dash. People seemed so determined to let me decide what was to be done about it. It can't be destroyed, and maybe that's a good thing. The magic in it doesn't need to ever be used for Nirvana again, but maybe it can have a different purpose. Wendy's eyes widened, Ichigo spotting a hint of hope in them. You mean? If Nabara was truly this magic's consciousness then he won't die so long as the magic survives. You look after him and I'm sure that you'll be able to hear his voice again. One day, I'm sure you'll be able to see him once more. Wendy glanced at him, slowly trying to give the lacrima back but he could see it was more of a forced action. She was afraid of false hope. I can't Dash. You can. He took the top of her hand and slowly pulled it over the lacrima. Besides, I'm sure he'd rather have you looking after him. He'd just gather dust or something at my place in some box. Keep him. Wendy looked back at the lacrima, a small smile flickering across her face when she spotted a trail of magic that seemed familiar to her. Thank you. It's my pleasure. Protector of the fairies. Hatred and fear. So there you are. Ichigo glanced up for his spot on the cliff edge, seeing the master looking at him. Here I am. The master gestured to the side of him and Ichigo nodded, the master slowly lowering himself down next to him. Wendy seems to be enjoying her welcoming party. Ichigo nodded. That she is. He had only been back in Magnolia a few hours now after traveling all the way back from Kate Shelter's old home. Wendy, after realizing she no longer had a guild to return to, had nervously asked if she could join them. No one had anything against the idea, though Natsu and Gray had been snickering to one another at a point about tricking her into believing there was a difficult entry exam. It would have worked if Wendy hadn't been certain she would get in if she stuck by Ichigo. It was what she was sure was happening with Jalal after all. She had even admitted it on the way back that and the only scary part was actually asking if she could join in meeting the people who were going to be her new guildmates. They had all agreed to keep what they knew on Nirvana a secret, or at least for now. They could explain it to the guild masters but it wasn't knowledge many others should know. And they especially had to keep the news away from the Magic Council, what with Wendy now being in possession of the legendary magic. Jura and the others had all gone their separate ways, returning to their own guilds. Jura had said he would keep an eye out for word on other sky magic users, claiming he was following up on a theory he had. Hibiki said he'd be more than happy to supply the information between them so long as he got to see it too, and they both had a feeling Hibiki was restless to find out himself. Leon and Gray's farewell had been awkward, neither of the two wanting to admit they would miss the other. The rest had been mostly normal except for Ren and Sherry almost not leaving the other's side. They had gained a few other companions for a brief moment on the way back. Lucy seemed to have gained some of Angel's celestial spirits, the spirits claiming that they had taken their keys earlier so that no one else could steal them before they gave them to Lucy. The girl had looked extremely happy after that and still was likely to be. The moment they had entered the guild they had been almost ambushed by the people inside. The master had pulled out all the stops for their victory, bringing out the best beer they had and filling the place with food. He had welcomed Wendy friendly enough and had managed to hide a lot of the hostility he felt around Jalal, something he knew the man had been thankful for. He was sure Jalal was back at the guild at the moment, slowly trying to make friends or keeping an eye on Wendy. The rest would likely be partying or doing other stuff. If the celebrations were anything like last time, he was sure Toshiro would have been captured by Kana and freed again and would be forced to join them at their table. No matter how much Toshiro complained, he could tell the kid liked being with them, mainly due to how they never seemed to treat him as a kid but rather a fellow apprentice. As for Shinji, well, he had likely gone off somewhere. He doubted the man had felt comfortable with all the stares he had been given after hearing about Urza's arm. It was the logical choice to the man and he had no emotional attachment to Urza about doing such a thing. Most of the guild found that hard to understand, though Gajeel had been surprisingly supportive last he had seen before he had left. And that was where he was now. Back at his home and just staring out into nothing. What time is it? 10. Really? Guess I've been out here a long time. You vanished from the party hours ago. Time flies. When you're staring at nothing. Or trying to use it to forget everything. Ichigo didn't answer, making the master sigh. A few people are a bit worried, you know. Said you didn't look great when you left. I'm alright, Ichigo muttered. The party was just getting too loud. And I didn't like the looks I was getting. Makarov frowned at him. I didn't see anything else but happiness or excitement. Did we see the same thing or am I being blind once more? Ichigo shook his head. You're not. It's just. I can't deal with their thanks right now. What happened? Makarov didn't bother bothering with the small talk. It was better for him to just jump to the heart of the issue. Hey master. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the mission. If you mean about Jalal, then don't worry. I'll get over him being here soon enough, especially as he learns to be his own person. Not many people could do what you did. And Wendy seems to be overjoyed. That's not it, Ichigo muttered. If anything, that's the only good I could do there. I was pathetic. I hardly think that's fair. You were right to fail me all those years ago. Makarov glanced at Ichigo sharply. Where is this coming from? I was wrong back then. I already admit that. Ichigo shook his head. This mission proved it. I wasn't red then, and I'm not now. It's not dash. How's Urza's arm? The master flinched, and he could see Ichigo had spotted it. See. I made a mistake. I jumped in too early, and got myself poisoned. The others have very few people to call on, and certainly no one as fast as I am. So she sacrificed her arm so she could keep moving. That dash. And that isn't the worst. Ichigo reached a hand up to his face, simply letting it fall against his skin. I told you I could control it. My inner hollow. I looked you straight in the eye and told you there would be no problems. Did any of them tell you what happened? I heard the details from Urza. Then you know what I did. You know of the danger I was causing to everyone. I came close to killing Shinji, and might have if Zero hadn't shown up. I fought Jura after I slaughtered Zero, and I should have killed him too. Makarov nodded. I heard. Urza said she spoke with Jura about it. But I don't believe that you are at fault. You did say that your hollow was under control, but Nirvana is a deadly magic. You can't blame yourself for it letting your hollow take control. And I even heard that you held back on blows that might have killed them. That's why I can't stand to listen to them thank me, muttered Ichigo. Don't you understand? I wanted to kill them. Those blows that should have killed Jura and Shinji, they were annoying when they didn't hit. I didn't try and stop my blows. If anything, I made sure to put as much force into them as possibly, even with the limited state my mind was in. Makarov frowned. Then how dash? I don't know. I don't know why they're alive, but it certainly isn't because of me. I caused problem after problem and did nothing to help. Makarov took a moment to take the information in. I still won't blame you. He sighed. Nirvana turns light to dark and dark to light. It could be expected that you wouldn't be in the right state of mind because of it. Don't worry. No one blames you. They should. Ichigo pushed himself off the cliff, letting himself fall to the ground below. He heard the master calling out to him but he ignored it, grabbing the air as he neared the ground and slowing his descent. He gave a glance up to the master before walking away further into the forest. He found a new decent place to rest after a few minutes, taking a seat with his back against a tree. It only took a moment to recognize someone was nearby, and had likely been for a while now. Levy. The blue-haired girl shot her head around from one of the trees nervously. I saw you with the master and thought I'd follow after you. He knows he's not the best person to speak to you anyway. And he doesn't notice everything I would either. I'm fine, Levy. You're wrong. He glanced at the girl who was now staring stubbornly at him. I'm perfectly dash. Big brother. Ichigo flinched, Levy's eyes showing concern as she approached. She slowly forced him to move up slightly as she sat down beside him, leaning against him for support. She could see it. She had been by Ichigo's side for 3 years almost daily. The only person who knew him better than her would be Laxus, and only due to him knowing Ichigo for 6 years. So she had seen how he had acted in the guild around Wendy. You treat her as a little sister, she muttered, knowing Ichigo could hear her. Wendy's so cute, you know. I'll likely end up stealing her as a little apprentice like with Kana. She's just too cute to ignore. And because of that you treat her as you do. Levy looked up at Ichigo's face, seeing nothing but suppressed emotions in a blank face. Every time you do, you're really happy. Some of the smiles you give her are rare. Laxus and I were the only ones who normally got to see those smiles. And every time you realize what you're doing you look almost ashamed. As if you feel guilty for something. Ichigo still didn't respond to her, Levy sighing as she continued. I spoke with Lucy about her mission. I asked her about how Brain made you angry when she said you suddenly launched yourself at him. She heard mention to twins, and that it seemed to almost set you off. But the thing that did was when he tried to say your name. Your last name. Levy laughed softly, though it was mostly forced. It's funny. Brain knew your last name but none of us do. You've never told anyone. Why? Why do you always try to avoid the question? Why don't you ever tell anyone about your past before Kisuk? Why don't you ever tell me? There was no response. Levy let out a sigh and moved to stand up. She knew she wouldn't get anything out of Ichigo if he didn't want to give anything up. She had just hoped. An arm shot out before she had finished standing up, gripping her own. It wasn't tight, and she was positive she could break out of it. Ichigo still wasn't looking at her, but it had been his arm that reached out to grab hers. And she could feel it shaking slightly. She stared for a moment before she lowered herself back down to the ground, Ichigo's hand lowering till she held it in her own. And she waited. Because he wouldn't have stopped her for no reason. Even if he didn't say anything in the end, he had wanted her to stay, even if it was just for her presence. She could see his mouth occasionally twitching, even going as far as to almost form a word before it shut. Until he spoke, she just sat there, enjoying the presence of him and the feeling of her hand in his. It was larger than she expected, or maybe it was because she was so tiny compared to him. Still, she enjoyed it. It was relaxing. Karen and Yuzo. She snapped straight out of her daydreams, listening to every word Ichigo spoke. She hadn't heard these names before, and she didn't dare interrupt to ask in case Ichigo stopped talking and didn't start again. They weren't even 1 back then. I was only 9, but I still loved them. They're my little sisters. Karen's the older one and Yuzo's the younger one. Twins. It's why I got so mad at Brain. Truth is though that I'm not sure if I was so mad at him because he threatened them or because he knew of them. Because he knew of my sin. Ichigo looked towards her, the look in his eyes shocking her for a moment. The eyes looked so lifeless. The first time I met Kisuk was after my mother died. I've accepted long ago that I didn't cause her death, but I still was there. She tried to save me, and she died because of it. Kisuk offered to train me and I took it. Ichigo sighed, glancing down at the ground. Why does a 9-year-old leave with someone they don't even know? Do you want to know why? Levy nodded after a moment, seeing he was waiting for a response from her. Why? Ichigo chuckled darkly. Because I honestly didn't care what the dangers were. And I had nowhere to return to. The only option was to go with him. Levy shook her head. You could have gone home. The dead look seemed to return to Ichigo's eyes. No. I couldn't. My mother. She was everything to us. She was our whole world. She held us all together. Ichigo's hand tightened in her grip. And I was there when she died. I helped cause her death. I can't dare to face my father and tell him Mum died trying to protect a foolish son. I can't look my sisters in the eyes and tell them I'm the reason they will grow up without a mother. A sigh escaped his lips. Even if they hid it, the anger would be there. I'm sure of it. They'd blame me. I'd be nothing more than an unpleasant reminder. It's better this way. It's much better. You don't sound so sure. Ichigo shook his head. No. I've seen my dad once. It was a glance, but I saw him. I know where to find him, and he likely knows where I am. Ichigo isn't a very common name and few have hair color like I do. He'd recognize me in an instant. And if he hasn't contacted me in all this time, then he doesn't even want to see me. Levi made to speak, but Ichigo cut her off. I'm fine. I'm okay with it. I came to terms with it long ago. And so you blame yourself, muttered Levi. You try to pretend nothing happened before Kisuke so it doesn't hurt. Yeah. Ichigo leaned to the side, falling against Levi slightly. His eyes glanced upwards to the sky, and Levi could swear she could see tears in Ichigo's eyes. I want to see them. Levi gripped the hand in hers tightly. Why don't you then? I told you dash. So what? She demanded, forcing him to look at her. Who cares about what they think? You certainly care too much. Levi dash. No. It's unfair. You want to see them so much. And yet you're doing the same as you did here. You idiot. Ichigo was caught off guard as she pushed him to the ground, hitting him with her fists even though she knew it wasn't hurting him. She just needed to get her frustrations out against him. You idiot, she muttered. She could feel herself almost crying too. You idiot. Idiot, idiot, idiot. You want to see them, don't you? You just admitted it. Stop trying to shoulder the world. You don't need to. You're putting everyone else's happiness above your own, and it's not fair. Life's not always fair, muttered Ichigo, grabbing her arms as she slowly stopped hitting him. She rolled down the ground next to him, one of his arms round her shoulders as she lay against him. It should be. You've done more than enough. It's okay, said Ichigo, reaching a hand out and wiping away a stray tear from her eyes. You came here to try and cheer me up, and look who ended up crying. Levi blushed red before turning away, pouting. Shut up. Ichigo smirked at her reaction. Levi. Yeah. Thanks. For listening. Levi smiled, even though Ichigo couldn't see her face. You're welcome, Ichigo. Protector of the fairies. Shinji watched from his hiding place as he saw Gray cast spell after spell, freezing the ground and summoning up constructs of ice as fast as he could. The guy had been at it for a few hours non-stop from what he could see, and despite how tired Gray looked, the mage wasn't giving up. He normally would have walked past and not bothered stopping, but this was different. He had meant to see this guy anyway, and to meet somewhere that there weren't loads of people at. He wanted peace and quiet for his chat. He slowly walked out of hiding, clapping his hands. Gray jumped round, the creation he had been making collapsing from the shock. Shinji observed it carefully with one eye. It seemed that gathering the ice already made and trying to reshape it took a lot of focus for the mage currently, and distractions could cause issues and make him lose his grasp on it if he wasn't careful. Yo, said Gray, trying to avoid sounding awkward. Shinji, right? I haven't actually talked to you much. Or seen you very often apart from with Nirvana and stuff. I'm more of a loner myself, said Shinji, his signature smirk in place. I don't hang around the guild much if Ichigo isn't there, and it isn't the most pleasant place right now. Well, maybe if you hadn't cut Urza's arm off then you wouldn't be in this situation. Shinji's smirk didn't drop in the slightest. Maybe. Is that you were so angry at midnight? You really showed him no mercy from the look of it. Gray froze. How did he know? He could have sworn no one else had gone to the place where he had fought. Urza hadn't seemed to have been there, and Leon had picked him up away from the area as they had bumped into one another not long after he had left. The only people who should have seen the battlefield by this point would have been rune knights, and a normal grunt wouldn't be able to recognize his ice magic from all the others users out there. I found where you fought, Shinji said in answer to Gray's thoughts. Nice place, but there was a lot of ice littering around the place. It reminded me of what I heard about Taoshiro's little winter wonderland, except less snow and more ice. You really didn't hold back. Gray stayed silent, Shinji taking the opportunity to continue speaking. I didn't think you had it in you. Few fairy tale mages have the mental strength to actually kill someone. They have lots of restraint and they certainly are powerful mages. But only in fighting. Not in battles. Shinji reached out and poked Gray on the chest. But you are. Why did you kill him? Did he upset you? Did he insult your family? Or was it because of Urza? He saw Gray flinch at the last one, his smirk widening. So it was because of Urza. I saw that Midnight was missing an arm. You wanted him to suffer as much as she was. You wanted to play with your prey before finishing it. I was angry, muttered Gray. I wasn't thinking clearly. Yes, you were. You don't freeze someone that deliberately without meaning to. You could have easily stopped, but you wanted him to suffer. You wanted revenge. So what? Gray snarled at the Shinigami in front of him. What's wrong with that? So what if I wanted to rip him to shreds? So what if I wanted him to suffer? So what if I played with him a bit? He deserved it. He would have done worse to others. And did you get the satisfaction you wanted? Shinji's voice was deadly cold as he spoke, causing Gray to shiver and look away in shame. No. Good. Gray's head shot up to see Shinji smirking at him once again. If you had said yes, then I would have killed you. It was only then that Gray noticed that Shinji's hand had never left the blade at his side. He was glad he had passed the strange test that he had just been subjected to. Revenge, muttered Shinji. It makes us angry. We want others to suffer. But it doesn't change anything in the end. When you snap out of it, what is there to be happy about? I went after Cobra in anger, and I would have killed him, but I didn't expect that it would make me feel better for Ichigo's suffering. The only way to move on is to accept that we can't kill for such a petty reason. We need to kill because it is what is necessary to do, and rage makes it hard to see that. Gray glanced at the man, Shinji seeing a hint of respect in Gray's eyes. Gray suddenly looked away, staring at the ground. Don't tell Urza. She doesn't need to know about this. I wouldn't anyway, but why? She's. Well, she's too pure, I would say. Her past wasn't the best, but she pulled through. All life is sacred to her now after what she went through, and You don't want her to frown at you like she did when she met me. Yeah. Well, I could. Shinji's smile became almost predatory as he walked over to Gray, the man looking at him cautious. However, I'd want something in exchange. You're not my friend. I won't do stuff for free. Huh? What the hell was that then? It was like you were trying to comfort me. Shinji stared at Gray in confusion. Oh. You thought I was comforting you? No, I was just deciding if you needed to die or not and seeing how much fun I could have messing with you. Gray snarled at him. Fine. What do you want? Well. Shinji placed his hands together in front of him. Become my student. Gray stared at Shinji in disbelief. What? You heard me. Be my student. Gray looked around suspiciously. What's the catch? A smirk was his response. Don't worry. I'm not going to harm you or anything. In all honesty, I just want something to do. I get bored at times, and I can't just annoy Ichigo. He has other people to interact with outside me. You should help pass the time. And you are one of the few in this guild with the right mentality for what I want to teach. Gray slowly weighted up all the options in his mind. He could always say no. He could deal with Urza somewhat, and there was a chance Shinji wouldn't be bothered to tell Urza. But on the other hand, he couldn't help but be interested in the opportunity he was being given. If it was anything like the training he had heard Ichigo had made Taoshiro do, He was slightly fearful, but it could make him stronger. He could perhaps even learn to control his ice better. Right now it wasn't good enough yet. "Find them," came his response. "I'll do it. You can teach me." "Good." Shinji took a finger and poked Gray's chest. "Tell me, how much have you heard of a little magic called Fullbring? Protector of the fairies. Come on. Another drink." "Yeah, another one here too." Byakuya gave a small twitch, unwilling to show any more emotion than that towards the two people in front of him. "Come on, Byakuya. Have some fun. Join us for a drink. And get us some while you're at it." Sometimes he wondered why he put up with these two. And then he realized he didn't have much of a choice. They were generals just like he was. And he guessed he could call them friends in a way. One of the two was always wearing a straw hat on his head and was known for skiving off his job as much as possible to go drinking. His pink Haori over the original Magic Council one made him easy to identify even without showing the symbol on the official Haori's back. He sometimes wondered who in the right mind would have made Shunsui Kyoraku a general, but he couldn't deny that the man had the strength needed for it. He had spared once with the man when he had first joined, nothing but arrogant thoughts in his head, and had felt outmatched at every turn after the fight was over. What else could he expect from someone who had 3 times as much experience as he did? The other man could only be described as strange. He'd taken his general Haori and tied it around his arm. The man had spiked his hair up and still had traces of stubble on his face, despite his attempts to get rid of it. This man was even stranger than the first. Half the time he acted like an overgrown child, doing whatever he wished. The other had him doting on his 2 daughters. He'd even brought them round a few times, proclaiming he wanted to show off his pride and joy. He hadn't missed the look he had seen on his hind's face that day. It was one of the only reasons he could tolerate the man. Because he had seen the utmost serious look on his hind's face as the man had watched their reactions. It had felt like he was being judged by the older man, and he was lucky the man found nothing he didn't like when he looked at him. Hine Kurosaki, also known as the eccentric general to most. His strength wasn't anything to joke about either. The man had never fought him, but he radiated a similar aura to Shunsui all the same. He hadn't originally seen much of the two when he first joined. He had been found by Juushiro when the man was traveling and had been given the offer to join the Magic Council after Juushiro had learned that he was a Shinigami. He had been bounced around for a while between different instructors, mostly teaching him things like tactics and swordsmanship in the early stages, along with how to control his magic more than it had already been. And after 2 years of that, he had run into the two when they had been out drinking. That day was a bit of blur, likely because they dragged him off with them and got him drunk with twice the amount of alcohol he had ever drank in his entire life before that day. He had thought to have been rid of them afterwards, but they had tracked him down the following day, barging into the accommodation he had been given and taking seats around in his home. He had barely been able to get rid of them since that day. They would always end up hanging around his place, saying it was far better than the usual bars. And he hadn't been able to argue much at the time, as they had both been generals and he had only been a rune knight, admittedly one with a few extra privileges. His rank had shot up not long after meeting the two as well, Shunsui taking it as his job to take him under his wing. He had been put through hell but the older man, but he couldn't deny that it wasn't worth it, even if the horrific flashbacks were quite annoying whenever he had them. Not 2 years later had he been elevated to Shunsui's assistant, and he had seen a lot more of them than before at that point, since Hine would skip work most days and head to Shunsui, the man also not doing his work either. How neither had been fired for a question no one could answer, but the work did always get completely somehow, and the two always did seem to never be surprised when he mentioned anything in the work piles. Finally he had managed to reach their rank too, becoming one of the generals the Magic Council had available at their disposal. He had never met any of the others, so he had no idea whether this was it or if there were more in other places, but Hine never answered properly and seemed to think he was trying to leave him and Shunsui. He couldn't completely deny it. "Oh, Byakuya." Shunsui reached into his coat and pulled out a small stack of papers he had hidden within. He waved them at the younger man, a teasing smile on his face. "What's this I hear about a Jelal encounter? It sounds fairly serious, especially as you let him go." Byakuya resisted tensing. He could see the look in the man's eye. While it may seem like he was having some fun with a joke, he knew better. The man was looking for answers of why he let a dangerous criminal go. Juoshiro gave away too much freedom. Shunsui nodded, getting the connection. That's Juoshiro for you. That Ichigo kid is something else if he put his own neck on the line for Jell-El. I met him once when I was with Juoshiro. Good kid, if a bit headstrong at times. Still, that's not a bad thing to be. Shunsui looked towards his drinking buddy. Hey Ishine. You ever met the kid? Of course I have, admitted Ishine proudly. He's my son. The sound of glass shattering filled the air, Shunsui not looking up from his hand where the glass had fallen from when his grip had suddenly loosened. Did I hear you just right? Did you say he's your son? Ishine nodded. Of course he. Can't you see the resemblance between us? Ishine struck a pose, trying to make himself look cool. It wasn't very effective when he had already drunk an entire bottle of alcohol. I don't see it, muttered Byakuya, still trying to work out if Ishine was even telling the truth. The man liked to lie sometimes, but it was always obvious when he did. You could tell in a second. Despite how impossible it seemed, Ishine didn't seem to be lying. Ichigo Kurosaki? The name fit somehow, or maybe it was hearing another part of a name after Ichigo that made it sound that way. Ichigo had to know his father was a general. And Ichigo knew that he was a general too and had to have seen his father fairly often. So why hadn't he said anything? His mind whispered the answer to him. It had to be the same reason that Ichigo always went by Ichigo only, and never anything else. He wasn't acknowledging that he was a Kurosaki. And with a father like that he couldn't blame the mage, but Ichigo didn't strike him as the person to just leave his family. Not with how he had defended Jell-El. I think I can, said Shunsui, reaching out for a new glass and pouring some of the alcohol into it. Juoshiro always liked the kid, but he had a lot of expectations of him from early on. I thought it had just been because of his teacher, but if you're his father then it makes even more sense. Why didn't you tell us about Ichigo earlier? Ishine frowned. What are you talking about? Of course I did. Didn't you hear all my stories about my wonderful son and his great adventures? Honestly? I thought they were half made up. I mean, you talk about a son but we never saw him or got a name, so I assumed you made him up to a degree or that he was dead. Ishine laughed, downing another glass. Nothing like that. He's just in the rebellious stage. You know how kids are. Byakuya refrained from mentioning Ichigo was technically an adult by this point. Besides, I'm surprised you didn't realize. It's not like I hid it from anyone. Byakuya was about to say more when he scowled, his gaze turning to the doorway where he saw one of his worst enemies. Yuruki. Yo Byakuya. Don't mind me. Ishine, get home already. I need to leave so I can't babysit your girls any longer. Alright, said Ishine, pushing against his seat as he got to his feet. He wobbled for a moment before he adjusted, his steps almost as they were normally. He and Shunsui had practiced hard to be able to throw off the effects of alcohol at a moment's notice if need be. It came in handy here. I'll see you all later. Ishine quickly followed out after Yuruki, the wizard saint popping her head into the room one last time and smirking at Byakuya, that smirk pushing half of Byakuya's buttons from just seeing it. She ducked back out before he could snap, following after Ishine who had already started going ahead. Thanks for looking after them, said Ishine as she caught up. I needed to do some stuff tonight. What, get drunk? Haha. Believe it or not, you can learn a lot drunk. People don't watch what they say around you. And it's fun too. Yuruki just nodded, letting Ishine believe what he wanted. And did you learn what wanted? Yep. Hanging out with Byakuya and Shunsui was just celebration. Where are you going anyway? I thought you could look after Karen and Yuzu for at least another hour. Nirvana. Ring any bells? Ah. Yeah. Ah. They apparently want to move it quickly, but to do so they need to make sure there are no traps around. I'm the fastest person out there, which makes me perfect for the job. Ha. I'm sure Ichigo could beat you. Give him a few years, sure. But right now I'm the goddess of Flash because no one is faster. Ishine glanced at the woman next to him, increasing his speed slightly with a small shunpo and watched as she matched his almost subconsciously. What did you want to speak about earlier? I kind of blew you off because I was busy and dumped the girls on you. It's not a problem. I like them. They're cute. So what was it that you wanted to say? Yuki glanced around subtly. Not here. Wait till we get further away. Ishine frowned but nodded, both vanishing in a burst of shunpo as they left the area towards Ishine's smaller home. It was still on the compound, but he had wanted a bit of privacy, his girls as the excuse and his rank to allow it. He had been forced to leave his old home after all, and he felt he deserved some compensation for that. He didn't want Yuzu and Karen running into trouble with any arrogant or obnoxious recruits after all. He slowed down as he reached the house, leaning against one of the walls as he turned to face Yuki. So then, what did you want to ask? Ichigo. Ishine didn't flinch from her accusing glaze. My son? What about him? Why didn't you tell me earlier? Ichigo frowned, putting on a face that made him look like an idiot, knowing it annoyed her. I'm sure I did. I told you all the time about my children. You're an old friend after all. And have you had any contact with any other old friends apart from me? Ishine dropped the look, returning the glare she was giving him. This is about Kisuke, isn't it? You knew. Of course I did. As if I wouldn't keep track of what my son is doing. I'll admit I couldn't find him to start with. Kisuke hides well, we both know that. From the moment he reappeared in Fairy Tail I had my eye on him. And do you know exactly what Kisuke did? Ishine frowned at her. It's none of my business. He's alive out there, isn't he? That's all I need to care about. Yuki let out a growl. You can't honestly think it is a good idea to leave him with Kisuke? Hollowification isn't a safe process. Byakuya said he heard a hollow's cry even from a distance, and he couldn't even find a trace of it afterwards. Who knows what effect it could be having on Ichigo? Enough Yuki. Besides, you didn't come here just to ask me about the past. Nothing can change now. What do you really want? Yuki glanced at the house. I want to train them. Absolutely not. Yuki took a sudden step back, the weight of Ishine's magic bearing down on her for a moment before he reeled it back at. Ishine took a deep breath in an attempt to calm himself before speaking again. You can't. I'm going to be teaching one or two things to them myself, and I know they want to join guilds when they are older. I've even been debating about moving closer to one so they can join soon and I can still keep an eye on them. Wouldn't having me as a teacher help them, however? Think how much they could benefit learning from the goddess of Flash. And protecting them wouldn't be a problem, especially if you need to leave them to go on missions. And besides, I've already taught them a few things anyway. They'd love having me teach them. The air grew colder, Ishine taking another deep breath as he attempted to get rid of some of his anger. It wasn't working. You went behind my back. Ishine dash. You had no intention of listening to my wishes, did you? Now hold on dash. Shut up. Ishine took a step forward, Yuki backing away in fear from the dark look on his face. I've already lost one of my children to you and Kisuke's little games. I won't lose any others. Lose? You won't lose dash. Have you ever seen Ichigo around here? Yuki slowly shook her head. That's because he doesn't come here. The first time I saw him turn up here, I made sure that he saw me. I wanted him to follow. He didn't. He just looked away. 4 to 5 years, and that was how he reacted to me. As if he didn't even want to see me. I don't know what happened when he trained with Kisuke, but he certainly should have found me earlier as well. Ichigo doesn't come here because he doesn't want to. And you blame Kisuke. If Kisuke hadn't taken him, he would have come home. He would have been safe with me. And now he's Kisuke's little toy, being played with until he breaks. I can't stop Ichigo because by this point it would be wrong of me to do so. But I won't let you drag my daughters into this too. I'm not like that. Oh really? Ishine laughed, his voice harsh. Then tell me, what would you do? Can you promise me they'll be safe? Can you promise me they'll be left alone? Yuryuki couldn't say anything. See. You can't. They have a lot of potential. People like that don't really get left alone. Ishine took another step forward. It doesn't matter if they have potential. They don't need to reach it if they don't want to. They shouldn't be forced towards it. I won't let them be. Yuryuki looked down at the ground, not daring to meet Ishine's eyes. They've already agreed. What have you done? Yuryuki flinched. I asked them today. They agreed. They wanted to learn more and to use magic. I said I'd teach them. You've overstepped your boundaries, Yuryuki. You can't stop me. Not without disappointing them. And you won't do that. They'd be safe. And they'd likely hate you like your son does. Ishine's hand shot out, grabbing Yuryuki by the throat before she even had a chance to react. Say that again. Yuryuki struggled in his hand, desperately trying to force air into her lungs as Ishine's grip tightened. I said say that again. She could feel herself blacking out. She was about to lose consciousness when the grip loosened as she fell to the ground, desperately breathing in as much oxygen as possible. You can train them. The words didn't sound like a win to Yuryuki, not with the voice Ishine was using. But I'll be watching your every move. Do something I don't like and you won't get a second chance. I'll kill you if you dare put them in danger. Yuryuki coughed. I'm not Kisuke. I don't believe in hollowification. Ishine glanced at her before turning his back to her. Hollowification isn't the problem I have with Kisuke. I can tell you the exact time he did it. Then why dash? Because the alternative was death. Ishine looked back at her for a second. And I'd do anything for my children. You better remember that, else you'll regret it. Both you and Kisuke will. Protector of the fairies. A scream ripped through the sky, but the only one to hear it relished in it. Zanjitsu raised his blade high, stabbing it deep into the hollow's flesh. He dug the blade as deep as possible, stepping back to admire his work. The hollow stared back at him in fear. Mercy. Please. Zanjitsu sneered. Where's that attitude of yours? Where's your laughter now? The hollow struggled against the blades, his flesh ripping more as he tried to escape. I didn't mean to dash. He was cut off by his own cry as Zanjitsu slashed another blade against his chest. You didn't mean to? You didn't mean to what? You didn't mean to turn Ichigo into a monster. You didn't meant to taint him. Please. Look at this world. Zanjitsu spread his arms out wide, his head bending back to look upwards. These clouds, this downpour. Who caused this pain? Who caused this despair? It was bad before dash. But it became worst after I let you loose. Zanjitsu sighed, bringing a hand to his face. I was a fool to think you would have good intentions for Ichigo. The moment you got a chance you took away his free will. I helped him, muttered the hollow. I tried my best. I stopped him from killing them. I saved them. You think I care? Zanjitsu let out a short burst of mocking laughter. You're the one who got us into this mess. I let you lose, and you allowed Nirvana to corrupt Ichigo. He would have been corrupted anyway. I don't care, stated Zanjitsu. Whether he uses my power for good or evil, for peace or destruction, I do not care. So long as he is my master. So long as he isn't a hollow. You twisted his soul into an abomination. The swords dug deeper into the hollow as Zanjitsu waved his hand. The hollow felt himself sinking, fear crossing his face. Hey! You can't do this. You can't suppress me. Not without Ichigo noticing. And you don't want him suspecting you now, do you? I listened to your taunts before. I listened to you as you manipulated my fears. No more. I won't let you influence Ichigo any further. He does not need your power. He'll notice. He'll hear me. He'll realize something is wrong. And why would he suspect me? I'm his Zanpakuto after all. Zanjitsu slowly brought a hand to his face, energy gathering, and forming a replica of the mask Ichigo could summon. The hollow looked at it in fear. Do you see? Asked Zanjitsu. He won't notice the difference. I'll provide him as much strength as he needs. I have to thank you for giving me the courage to do this. I might have been too afraid otherwise. You won't get away with it. Ichigo will come. He'll hear my voice. And he won't help you. He no longer needs your influence. I am all Ichigo needs. I am all he ever will need. You can stay around here, and you can vanish. I will protect Ichigo from now on. I will keep him safe. Then who will keep him safe from you? Protector of the fairies. A return isn't always good. Urza parried the blow, wielding a sword in her hand as she struggled against the current onslaught of attacks. Her instincts made her move, taking a step back just as a blade sliced where she had been. She instantly responded with an attack of her own, but her opponent avoided it with ease. She panted a bit, exhaustion from the past few hours kicking in with a vengeance. She had been asleep in her room before this. She had woken up especially early, planning for some training to get used to being able to fight with one arm. The guild's medical advisor, poor Lyusica, had asked to speak to her later as well. She said something about wanting to check on her arm's condition and how it was a pain to deal with. She had already had it examined a week ago, so she didn't see why she needed to go again. Maybe it was like with her eye, however. She had to go and see the lady multiple times originally in case of infection, and maybe she just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything wrong. Despite her outward attitude, the lady was a very nice person to be around. Of course her plans had changed a bit when she had woken up. Instead of her room, she had found herself in the forest somewhere. She half thought she had sleepwalked until she heard a noise close to her. She had spun round, attacking before anything else. She knew from the sound that she hadn't been sleepwalking. She had been kidnapped. Her strike was easily dodged, Ichigo stepping forward and knocking the blade from her hands in one move. She wasn't sure what was going on, however he didn't make any other moves. He just stared at her, his Zanpakuto at his side already drawn. She had realized what he wanted from her quite quickly. He wasn't admitting it, but he still felt guilty for her arm. And this was the best way he knew to try and repay her. Through training. With a flash of light, her armor had appeared on her. Ichigo had suddenly flashed forward, his sword glowing with energy as he slashed at her, a new sword of her own coming up to defend herself. The two blades connected and she saw the faint signs of a smirk on his face before the energy had been released from the blade, tearing into her armor and breaking it into pieces. She had almost exploded. That was one of her favorite armors. Before she could talk, a blade was at her throat, Ichigo's eyes cold as he stared at her. "You're slow." She wanted to protest, but, after a few hits after being released and two other armors being destroyed, she realized what he was after. To fight without being weighed down. To fight without relying on armor to defend yourself and instead using your own skills to fight. So she had to switch armors. A flash of light and she had abandoned all remaining armor, wearing nothing more than a pair of red trousers with flame patterns at the bottom of them, while bandages were wrapped round her chest to hide her breasts. A single katana rested in her hand. Ichigo had given her a single nod of approval before he had attacked again, this time simply using his blade without any energy hidden around it. And that had led them to where they were now hours later, her fighting desperately as she was forced back. She couldn't help but smile though. It was fun. It was scary at moments and hard at others, but she was ecstatic. She hadn't fought against him for years, and he was even better than he had been back then. She couldn't believe the gap in their skills had widened so much, but she'd trained with too many weapons over the years, and that was the cause of the difference here. Her skill with swords would only increase as she fought with him. It was becoming easier to fight as well. She had made a few mistakes earlier, using maneuvers that used to work but relied on using a second arm to attack rapidly. A parry and strike. Those openings would have killed her if this had been a real fight. She was proud in that she had managed to put a cut on him. Ichigo had gotten annoyed at her dulling her attacks earlier on when a few had managed to get through and had made his attacks even faster in retaliation. He had claimed that she was being foolish in treating him as an ally as they fought, and that he would turn the training into a version of hell if needed to make her fight him as an enemy. There should be no hesitation in her strikes, he had claimed. It surprised how, and worried her, on how easy she had been able to stop dulling the blade. Her focus seemed sharper and the blades felt more deadly, and she guessed that was his point. She needed to have her full attention against him, else he would simply break through her defenses and knock her back down to the ground. She slashed at him as he came towards her again, her blade clashing against his. Ichigo's eyes glanced upwards, seeing the sun and roughly working out the time before he adjusted his blade against her attack, adding additional force as he forced the blade out of her hands and to fall onto the ground behind her. She went to pick her sword back up, still on guard. She had just picked it up when she saw Ichigo sheath his sword, shaking his head. "That's enough for today. I can still fight. I'm not done yet." Ichigo shook his head at Urza's protests. "You're exhausted. We're stopping for now. Besides, don't you need to see someone?" Urza tilted her head before her eyes widened as she realized who she was meant to meet. "Poor Lyusica. I need to hurry." "Relax," said Ichigo, following after her as she headed towards the edge of the area they had been in. "Besides, you're already here." Urza frowned before seeing the doctor's house in the distance. She nodded her thanks before rushing towards the building, Ichigo waving as he left in the opposite direction. Urza was just at the door when it opened, an elderly pink-haired lady glaring at her in annoyance. "Get in already," she muttered, practically dragging Urza into the house and forcing her into a chair. She quickly vanished into another room before coming out with some medical supplies. "Honestly, poor Lyusica," muttered as she began treating the wounds Urza had. "This is why I hate humans. You do nothing but fight and end up hurt. I don't know why I bother." Urza just smiled awkwardly at the lady. It was sometimes hard to deal with this. Anyone who came here normally left with a lecture of some kind, but at least poor Lyusica did heal them up anyway, despite how annoyed she could sound. A needle stabbed into her arm and she winced, shooting an annoyed glare at poor Lyusica for not warning her. Poor Lyusica didn't seem to notice, her hands moving her body around for a better look at her missing arm. "Foolish girl," muttered poor Lyusica, her voice a lot softer this time. "A fake eye is easy to make, but a missing arm is a lot harder. I'm not a miracle worker. It's okay, poor Lyusica. I was thankful enough back then for your help with my eye." Poor Lyusica nodded, her arms leaving Urza and staring at the missing arm once more. "Just about right, I think." "What is?" Poor Lyusica ignored her, quickly retreating from the room. A loud crash was heard before she heard poor Lyusica shout in anger. A few moments later she reappeared, a box in her hands. "Are you dash?" "Never mind that," she shouted, chucking the box at Urza. Urza had to swiftly catch it with her hand before it hit her face. She glanced at it and, on poor Lyusica's insistence, opened the box. Inside was what looked like wood. She moved a bit of the cloth covering it away before she noticed some of the detail it had. She quickly ripped the rest of the cloth away, almost positive on what she was holding. She slowly took the object out, examining it closely. It was a wooden arm. "I can't regrow your limb," poor Lyusica explained, slowly taking the limb from Urza. She detached a piece at the end of the joint before taking it over to where Urza's arm had been severed, carefully attaching it. "But what I can do is give you a substitute." With the piece attached to the stump of Urza's old arm, poor Lyusica took the remaining part and reattached it to the joint, the arm hanging limply at Urza's side. "How? How do I move it?" Urza couldn't keep the joy out of her voice as she looked at the arm, even if it was a bit shorter than her original. "That's the hard part, I'm afraid." Poor Lyusica sighed. "I can't deal with something as complex as this. I got this sent over once I saw you the first time. At least you can choose to have it or not." Poor Lyusica quickly lifted the limb a bit, examining how easily the arm could bend at the joints. "The problem is that a correct prosthetic limb isn't something I can do by myself. You'll need to go further away to find a good supplier of them, and even then they aren't the best right now. It's a new field. Right now it's more for appearance sake, though there is something you can do with it." Urza leaned in towards poor Lyusica. "What is it? You know telekinesis, don't you? That's all the advice I can get you." Poor Lyusica's usual annoyance appeared. "I've done what I can. Now get out my forest." Urza found herself forcefully removed from the small house, despite her attempts to speak to the woman. The door slammed behind her, a sign on it saying to leave her forest as she had said before. Urza sighed before heading off, though not before taking another look at her new arm. She'd have to decide how often she used this, or even if it was worth using. The arm was slightly off in length, and that would make it hard to get used to even if she got her arm working. But she couldn't resist the temptation to try. Her eyes closed for a moment, willing her magic to work as she wanted. And as she slowly opened her eyes, she was greeted to a slow-moving hand next to her. She couldn't help but smile. Protector of the fairies. Gildarts smiled as he walked along the path ahead of him, his mind wandering off like it normally did whether it was safe to or not. It had taken a while to get back, but he was almost home. And after 3 years too. He wondered how the guild was doing. 3 years. It really had passed quickly. He had expected to have been away for a long time though, and it wasn't like he hadn't been away for a long time before anyway. But he doubted he'd be going away for long for a while now, or at least till he fully recovered. He still had the wounds from his encounter with that beast. Still, he had things to look forward to even if he did stay there for a while. He had heard a lot of rumors on his way back. Apparently there had been a war of sorts between Fairy Tail and Phantom Lord, and he knew who had won judging by the fact that he had sensed the magic of fairy law from such a far distance. The master must have really been meant to have used that magic against Jose. He couldn't say the man didn't deserve it however. It was nicer than what he would have done. He almost didn't believe it when he heard the other big rumor. It wasn't much, and most people seemed to act like it was a play of sorts, but he couldn't help but wonder. There had been a lot of magic being used around the time of the Fantasia parade according to people, and some even said that they saw a large burst of lightning in the sky. And to make things worse, he had heard that Laxus hadn't been seen around Fairy Tail for a while now. When an S-class mage vanished, people usually talked. But where was Laxus? And what did he do? Finally there was the latest rumor, something that had made him increase his speed to get back quickly. People said the Magic Council had launched an operation to stop the Dark Guild, Oration Cease, from fulfilling some goal or other. They claimed 2 wizard saints had led the charge, and he recognized the man in the photo next to Jura. That was Ichigo. He couldn't believe it. He hadn't even heard any rumors about Ichigo being back, so it had to have been fairly recent or maybe he had just missed them. And for him to be a wizard saint after all this time almost made him laugh. He wondered if he could persuade the master to promote him if he wasn't already. It all depended if he was still as stubborn as he remembered back 3 years ago. He smiled as a familiar magical signature appeared on the edge of his senses. He brought up a hand in greeting as Ichigo appeared next to him. It's been a while, Ichigo. Ichigo nodded. You look. Ichigo glanced at Gildarts, seeing the cloak the man wore was even more tattered than before. Not as good as you left. A bit of wood peeking out of the cloak caught Ichigo's eye and he was already peering down at it when Gildarts rolled back part of his sleeve instead. Your arm. Gildarts nodded, looking down at his left arm and sighing slightly. I encountered a problem on my mission. I bit off more than I can chew, and I paid for it. Gildarts rolled back the pants leg on his left leg too, showing a wooden prosthetic just like his arm was. The slight movement made as he rolled the cloth back down let Ichigo spot a row of bandages around the man's chest. What the hell did you fight? A dragon. Ichigo froze. A dragon? Like the ones Natsu is familiar with? Did it have a name? Gildarts laughed, trying to lighten the mood. Yeah. I'd say it is the same type as Natsu is familiar with, if there are any other types at all, but it wasn't a friendly one. I don't know what it was called, but it will likely become obvious to me when I do some research on it. It was too powerful. It took a mere moment but in that time it had gotten my left leg and arm and had even gotten at my organs. I'm lucky to be alive honestly. How are you alive? He shrugged. Divine intervention? I think it was because the people of the village nearby hear the dragon's roars and came to investigate. They said I was almost dead when they found me, and I would have been if they hadn't come. Ichigo shivered slightly. I thought the dragons were either gone or hiding. I think they just prefer to stay where few people will go. And few people go on the quest I went on. Gildarts raised a hand and patted Ichigo on the back. I asked you to wish me good luck 3 years ago. Thank you for that. I really did need it. You're welcome. Good. Now that's out of the way with what's been happening here in Magnolia. I heard a few rumors, some about Laxus. Ichigo's shoulders dropped, and Gildarts could see a brief flash of sadness in his eyes. He got in some trouble. Tried to change things, but went about it all wrong. Tried to use force to fulfill his goals. They were about you, weren't they? Yeah. I thought so. Laxus acting like that for himself? I wouldn't buy it very much. Despite how he may sometimes act, he's a good man. Had a lot of anger issues though, but they only involved around one person. Yeah. The master's doing okay, though he didn't seem to have his heart in having to expel Laxus. Give Laxus a little longer away and I feel the master may decide to forgive him. He'd offer the same chance to his son if he didn't know how dangerous Yvonne is. I heard about some of that. Raventail has been getting stronger over the years. Speaking of dark guilds, however, how do you end up involved with Oration Cease? That sounds like quite an adventure. Ichigo glanced away, but not before Gildarts could spot a dark look in Ichigo's eyes. Yeah. An adventure. Gildarts chuckled awkwardly at the suddenly tense atmosphere. Well, let's not worry about that. He grabbed Ichigo by the back of his clothes, pulling him along as he continued along the path. Let's head to the guild already. I'm starving, and I really need to check in before going to sleep as well. Maybe I'll pay a visit to Natsu at some point today. I can't wait to see how he and Lisana are doing. They were so cute together the last time I saw them. Lisana. Ichigo frowned. He hadn't actually seen her around since he had gotten back, and he hadn't dared to ask about her when he started wondering why she wasn't around. I think that she's dead. Gildarts stopped misstep, his head snapping round to face Ichigo. Dead? Ichigo shrugged, feeling awkward with the current conversation. I haven't seen her around for a while, but in all that time no one has mentioned her even once. I could be wrong, but I think I'm right here. Gildarts's shoulders dropped. I see. Natsu. He must be devastated. He's doing okay from the look of it. He's a bit more level-headed than before, even if he still acts a fair bit like the old Natsu. Most of the guild is the same, though Myra is a complete 180. I think you can guess why. What about the master? Has he been giving you any trouble? Ichigo shook his head. If it's anything, I'm the one who's caused problems for him. But he's been perfectly fine. Much better than before. Who knows, I might end up as an S-class mage this year. Gildarts smiled. That you might. A loud bell sounded in the distance as the town came into view, and he could see it all rearranging before his eyes. Brings back memories, doesn't it? I'm not sure really. My memories of here are a bit bloody. Gildarts patted him on the back. At least one of us remembers. You were in a terrible condition that day. Good thing it didn't last. You would have been boring to talk to otherwise. I'm better at remembering the part afterwards. Most of the stuff before that was all a blur. You still after that ace position of mine? You bet. I'll take it from you for sure. Gildarts smirked. I'll like to see that one day. With the way you're going, that'll be sooner rather than later. It'll be nice to be able to leave that title in capable hands when I finally retire. You're not that old. Don't act like you're an old geezer already. Gildarts burst out laughing. He hadn't had this much fun talking to someone in a while, what with being alone most of the time he had been away. It's good to see you again, Ichigo. I mean it. I hope the 3 years for you were better than mine. Much better. That's good. Gildarts smiled as the guild hall came into view, slowly recognizing the place even with the appearance changed. It had that feel about it. It's good to be home. Protector of the fairies. Wendy waved at the others as she left the guild, heading home for the day. She sighed as she saw the rain, debating whether to use her magic to do something about it. She didn't want to get wet on the way back, especially as she had to walk a fair distance anyway as Jalal was staying late today and she didn't want to wait to get back tonight. Well, it wasn't exactly right to call him Jalal since he didn't like them calling him that. Everyone had been careful with his name, waiting for him to find a name he could use for himself that didn't link him to his past. It wasn't easy for him, but she was sure he'd find one that suited him. As she stepped outside, her magic quickly burst to life, a small thin layer of wind forming above her. She could walk happily now as the water hit the barrier and slid down the side of it, keeping her nice and dry. Carla stayed close to her, a worried look on her face. She didn't understand why Carla was so scared. She had practically exploded at Happy in anger earlier, despite how kind he had been to her. She felt bad for the other cat, especially with how mean Carla had been. But she didn't get why Carla was like that. What was making her act as she was? She kept acting up at the smallest things. It was because of Carla that she had decided to leave early. It was better that Carla leave now before she got in any more trouble, and it was easy to persuade her as Carla was pestering her all day to leave the guild for the day. She couldn't complain now. She liked Fairy Tale. It was nice, and everyone was so friendly towards her. Levy, Ichigo's friend, had been one of her favorites, though she had been cautious in the beginning due to the look in her eyes. Kana had walked over to her and patted her on the shoulder before wishing her luck and walking away. She hadn't gotten it at first, but she had now. In hindsight, she shouldn't have mentioned to Levy that she only really knew how to use support magic. The girl's eyes had grown wider for a moment before a beaming smile had appeared on her face, a smile that had somehow freaked her out. And the next day she had found herself being dragged from the guild by the hand by Levy, claiming she was borrowing her. She had heard Kana's laugh as she had been dragged out, and would admit she had been slightly scared for a few moments. She had been dragged all through town till they had reached the outskirts and passed through a forest. They had finally reached a small house with what seemed to have construction work happening around it. She had seen Ichigo and Jalal trying to place beams in position while Shinji and Taushiro helped support them as they were placed. She hadn't understood why she had been there. Levy had smiled at her and had basically asked her if she wanted to be able to protect people. She had nodded, because of course she did. It was why she had put so much effort into her healing magic, as even if she couldn't fight she could still help and save lives. She had obviously answered right in Levy's eyes, as she had seen approval in the girl's eyes before Levy had all but declared that she was going to tutor her personally. She hadn't seen what was wrong with it until later when she had collapsed onto the ground next to Levy in exhaustion. And the girl had said that it was light training compared to some of the training Taushiro had likely gotten. Still, she kept going back. Levy had explained that she had been a support mage herself, and that she had pushed herself in an effort to keep up with the other members of her team so she could stand on equal ground. The show of skill had been both impressive and inspiring to her, and she couldn't help but to keep seeking out the girl. She didn't expect for Levy to have stolen her belongings from her room in the dorms, however, or to be abruptly moved into the house she had seen on the first day with her. Levy had proclaimed that as her apprentice she needed to be able to help her out whenever possible, and she said it was much cheaper staying with her. Something about there being no rent because Ichigo was too kind to actually ask for it. Wendy could see the truth though when she looked into Levy's room next to hers. It was because Levy wouldn't be able to afford to pay rent with the amount of books she bought, even if Ichigo did ask for it. She could also see why all that construction work had been going on. Shinji and Taushiro seemed reluctant to live elsewhere, and Jalal physically couldn't right now with so many people knowing what Jalal looked like. They had to cover his head when they had originally been going through Magnolia, and he still took precautions now if he went out. If he did go anyway, he liked to stick with either her or Ichigo most of the time. He wasn't sure if anyone would treat him the same outside of Fairy Tale if the rest of the city's population learned of his old identity. So the house had been expanded. The smaller living room she had seen had been forced to be added onto as well with all the extra people, and it was much nicer than before. She was also saving most of the money from her jobs now because of having a room there, though she had seen the longing stares she had gotten from Kana and Fried when she had spoken to them a few days ago. She guessed they really wanted a place there too, what with Kana being Levy's previous student and Fried being one of Laxus's apprentices. She wondered how long it would take before they'd try and pester Levy about it. She had heard people mention Laxus plenty of times around her, though mainly from Ichigo and Levy. Others spoke of him in passing sometimes, and they didn't seem to know exactly how to feel about him. Ichigo and Levy however were open with their stories, saying all of his good qualities and bad and how that he was away at the moment trying to find himself. She hadn't pressed further after hearing that, getting the gist of why he wasn't there and why the guild didn't know how to feel about him. He must have done something wrong and had been forced to leave. It would have been good to have seen what the old team Levi talked about was like. She had said the three of them always had so much fun together. After almost 2 weeks with Levi, she could feel herself growing stronger ever so slightly. Levi had her practicing with a wooden staff at times when they fought, claiming that she couldn't teach this to Kana because of her fighting style but she could for her. She had been described as a bit of a blank slate when it came to fighting, and that suited Levi perfectly. She was sure that she had imagined it as well, but at times she could almost feel a small hint of warmness coming from Nabara. She always kept him with her, making sure he was kept safe and out of harm's way. She missed him, but it wasn't as bad as before, especially as she did get these slight feelings from him at times. "Hey Carla," she said, turning towards her friend. "Are you okay?" Carla frowned, looking up at her and tried to smile. "Of course I am, Wendy. Nothing to worry about." Carla had been looking around awkwardly for a while now. She had been looking at the sky a lot as well but she couldn't feel anything wrong with it, and her sight didn't show her anything unusual. Maybe Carla was nervous with all the new people. She had been harsh to Kate Shelter when she had first been born as well. "You need to try and be nicer." Wendy stopped and knelt down by Carla, giving her a happy smile. "Everyone's so nice so you don't have to be so mean to them." Carla nodded somewhat awkwardly. "I'll bear that in mind." "That's good. You and Happy have so much in common as well." "I have nothing in common with that trash," snarled Carla, Wendy jumping back from shock at the sudden viciousness in Carla's voice. "Who does he think he is? He dares to forget? He dares to pretend everything is fine. I can't stand him. It's one thing to go against it, but it's another to forget it. He'll end up getting Natsu killed." Wendy stared at her friend in concern. Carla had never acted like this before. She had never been so angry at anyone. What did he forget? Carla's eyes snapped to her, widening in shock before she looked away. "Nothing. It's nothing. Don't worry about it." "Carla. You said something about him getting Natsu killed. What did you mean?" Carla shook her head. "It's nothing. I'm just angry. Let's head home." Wendy looked uneasily at Carla but she still led the way. Carla seemed to feel more at ease the further they got. She was just reaching the edge of the city when she saw something familiar. She froze, her head turning as she followed the object of her desire in shock. That presence. She knew it. No one else had it. No one else was like a void. No one else was like her Jalal. The man she had been watching stopped, turning to look at her. He was dressed up in a lot of cloaks and hoods, making sure barely any skin was being exposed. 5 staves rested on the man's back, and she could just see his eyes through the hood and mask he was wearing. She took an involuntary step towards him, her eyes watering slightly. She was glad no one else was around her to hear her next words. "Jalal." Her Jalal seemed to smile at her, or at least his eyes made it seem like they did. He walked slowly towards her, his movements sluggish for some reason. He looked weak. What had he been doing? He reached her before a hand reached out and landed on her head. His other hand came up and pulled his mask down a bit, revealing a sad smile. "I'm glad I got to see you again, Wendy." Wendy nodded, taking a step forward to embrace the man. This was him. The man who had saved her all those years ago when she had been lost. The man who had taken her to Kate's shelter. The man who had helped her not feel so alone. "I missed you, Jalal," she muttered, and she hoped she wasn't messing up his clothes too much by crying on them. She was just so happy. "I go by Mistogan nowadays," he answered. He slowly pulled away before almost dragging her out of the city. "I'm glad I saw you before it was too late. It's a shame you ended up here though." Wendy struggled, shocked by his sudden tone. "Wait, what are you talking about? Why do I need to leave?" "I couldn't stop it," Mistogan muttered. "I tried so hard, but it's too strong now. I can no longer suppress its power. I can't stop what is to come." "Stop what?" Mistogan looked upwards. "Anima." She remembered that word. It had been the word that had suddenly made Mistogan leave her. Everything had been fine till he said that word. She followed her gaze and she slowly saw what was forming. It must have been too small before. That would have been why she had missed it. But above the city she could see a void in magic appearing, widening, and growing with every passing second. What is that? She asked almost fearfully. Something that will suck away everything beneath it. You need to get out of here before it is too late. No. She looked back towards the city, her eyes staring at the fairy tale guild hall. I need to warn the others. Miss Dogan's grip on her arm increased as she tried to break free. I can't let you do that. I won't risk you dying. Let me save at least one life here today. I'm sorry. Wendy swung her arm out, the wind slashing across Miss Dogan's hand and forcing him to release her in pain. He tried to reach out for her as she broke free, but she was already out of his reach, and he was too weak to chase after her. Carla stared up at him, staring after Wendy. Don't go, Wendy. Wendy heard the words as she ran, not looking back but still trying to figure them out. Was Carla scared for her? Or did she already know of the anima? She had been scared all day, and yet she said nothing. She could have warned people if she knew it was going to happen. She certainly didn't look very surprised at Jalal's no, Miss Dogan's talk. She couldn't consider all the implications now, however. That hole in the sky was getting wider, and she could see people looking up as she passed, seeming to notice something was wrong. The hole was like the eye of a storm, the clouds being dragged around it, and she could already see magic being dragged into it. She abandoned her shield around her, not caring for the rain any longer. She had to hurry. She had to focus. But as she reached the guild and took that step into it, her mouth opened to shout a warning, it was too late. Everything went white and, when she could see properly again, nothing was there. The entirety of Magnolia was gone. Protector of the fairies. Nothing but the void. Ichigo's eyes snapped open, a cold feeling in his chest. The first sign something was wrong was that he was simply lying on the ground. He could have sworn he had been resting on his bed when he had sat down on it. The other was the ground itself. His hand traced along it, feeling the smooth white surface he was now lying against. What was it? It felt unnatural. It was like nothing he had ever felt. In fact, it felt like nothing, or at least in a magical sense. It was like nothing existed in it. He pushed himself up, looking around him. His home was gone, and half the area around it was too. It stopped unevenly around him, looking more like it had been caught up at the edge of something. At least he could rule this out as being an attack of some kind on him. Hey Shinji. You here? There was no response. He reached down to the ground, pulling up his Zanpakuto that had luckily survived whatever had happened. It seemed Shinji wasn't here. But where was he? He reached out with his senses and begun his search. His sword almost fell from his hands. What the hell was this? What the hell was wrong with the world? It was like a void. He couldn't sense anything. Wait. His mind locked onto the few anomalies he could find and he sped off towards them as fast as he could. He couldn't sense the magic in that void, but the ones he could sense were blinding now that the natural magic in the atmosphere wasn't there to create background interference. He picked up his speed even further when he saw the light in the sky, even if it was vanishing now. Judging by its position, he had a good idea what the target had been. Magnolia. He had just happened to have been caught in the blast radius to a degree. Reaching the edge of the forest, he sped out towards the city, being greeted by a blinding white landscape. There was nothing there, and judging by how many people normally were missing, it was nothing good. Was this the result of a new weapon? After seeing Nirvana, something doing this wasn't as impossible as he might have previously thought. But what could do such a thing? The damage seemed too precise in its operation instead of a simple gathering of raw power. Hey! He shouted as loud as he could as he ran across the white surface, looking around for anyone he might have missed with his senses. The only ones that he could pick up seemed to be near the guild, or where it used to be at least. A man suddenly came to alive beside him, Ichigo raising his blade in preparation only to find Mistogen appearing in his mist form. The man's body returned to normal and he collapsed next to him, barely able to stand. Ichigo quickly reached out and slung one of the man's arms over his shoulder, helping the man along as he kept heading to the guild. What the hell is going on here? I couldn't stop it, muttered Miss Doggin. It was too powerful. Too big. Anima. Ichigo glanced at his companion. Anima? Did it do this? He could see the man slowly look up into the sky. Yes. Yes, it did. I'll ask my questions later then. Come on. Some of the others are still up ahead. Miss Dogan's eyes shot towards him, hope and disbelief showing on the part of his face that could be seen. You can't be serious? There's still people alive. Yeah. I can sense a few of them, but they aren't many. Wendy. Is she one of them? Ichigo thought for a moment before nodding. Yeah. You know Wendy. I guess you could say we're old acquaintances. Then let's hurry up then. Miss Doggin slowly freed himself from Ichigo and ran by himself, both rushing to find any of the remaining survivors. It was eerie being there, not having a single living thing in sight. A void of silence, in more ways than one. It felt wrong to him, in more ways than one, though particularly the lack of magic. Finally he saw someone though. Wendy was collapsed against the ground, almost hyperventilating as she looked around everyone. Wendy. She spun round, relief filling her face as she sped over to the two and crashed against them, refusing to let go. They're all gone. And magic. I can't see it. Where did it go? Why can't I see it? Why? Ichigo placed a reassuring hand on her head as he continued looking around him. To his relief it seemed to calm her down. It'll be all right. We'll fix this. She nodded, relief appearing on her face now that she had something to latch onto. Right. Ichigo looked around, walking forward a bit as he left Wendy in Miss Dogan's care. He could sense someone right by them. He was almost on top of them. His foot stopped as it hit the ground and he frowned. He had been mistaken. His senses had literally meant that he was on top of someone. He reached down and pulled away some of the white ground, it easily crumbling under his fist. There wasn't much resistance to it compared to a normal surface. A head popped out of the hole he had made and looked around strangely. Hello. Ichigo sighed at Natsu before ripped a bit more of the ground apart and helping him up. Good to see you're fine too. Natsu nodded, staring at the landscape around him. I was asleep. I thought something felt wrong all of a sudden. I was the same. I woke up instantly. It must have taken you a bit longer as you got trapped underneath whatever this stuff is. So where are we? Magnolia. Natsu glanced at him in disbelief. I know what Magnolia. He trailed off as his eyes looked to the distance. Looking closely, he recognized those sites. He had climbed a few of them at times and had exploded half the others. He recognized the lake nearby, even there was a lot less water in it than before. Ichigo was right. This was Magnolia. How? No, scratch that. Where is everyone else? Ichigo shook his head. You're one of the few I could still sense. Speaking of which. Ichigo took a few steps away towards where he suspected the bar normally was. He smashed a hand against the ground again, putting another hole in it. You can stop hiding, Gajeel. Gajeel laughed, stepping out of the newly created hole. I was just having some fun. What's wrong with that? Not the time. You're no fun. Gajeel glanced at Natsu. So you're still here, Salamander? His eyes turned towards Wendy. And the new brat too. Hell, even Miss Dogan's here. We've got a nice little party of sorts. Were you awake? Gajeel nodded. It was strange. I kind of wish I had been standing at the time. I think I might have not been trapped if that had been the case. You would have anyway. Ichigo turned. That hadn't been him who had answered. Taoshiro? I thought I could sense you. Taoshiro nodded, stepping out a small hole he had just made for himself. I was standing at the time and I got trapped under. He looked towards Wendy. If she didn't, then she was likely just outside the Epicon tray. I was unfortunately right by it, I believe. So what do you think the objective was? Taoshiro glanced around them, making a statement. What do you think? Fairy tale. Probably. Ichigo looked back at Gajeel. So did you see anyone? Same question for you, Taoshiro. I'm guessing both of you were still awake after all. Taoshiro shook his head, but Gajeel paused in his actions, his head tilted a bit with his eyes closed as he tried to concentrate. I think I saw that cheerleader vanish with a spirit or something. She seemed confused, but it might have gotten a warning and evacuated her at the last second. So she should be back soon then. She won't, said Mr. stepping towards them with Wendy by his side. Happy and Carla seemed to have joined them, something Natsu was happy to see. I've done some research of celestial spirit magic when I was looking into dimensional properties, and from what I've gathered the spirit world is a bit out of sync. Even being there for a few seconds is long enough for us to not see her for anywhere between minutes to days. It depends if it's a good day or not and how quickly the trip was organized. Ichigo sighed. She's safe though. That's one other person still okay at least. Why were you looking up stuff about different dimensions though? Seems like an odd topic. Mr. looked at Carla. Shall I tell them or do you want to? Carla jumped back in shock. You know. Mr. reached up to his face, pulling his mask away. You saw my face early. I share the same face as Jalal for a reason. It's because I'm Jalal as well. Natsu snarled but held back from moving. I really want to hit him, you know. That's because Ichigo won't let you hit the original, muttered Gajeel, Natsu nodding in agreement at hearing the statement. That's probably it. Mr. smiled at them. Surely you didn't forget seeing my face from before. Of course not. Just some bad memories. Mr.'s smile dropped somewhat. I'm not proud of what this world's version of me did, but what can you do? All dimensions have different routes people take after all. Ichigo frowned. Did you just say this world's version of you? Yes. Mr. raised a hand up, pointing up at the sky above where faint light was still able to be seen. Up there is a rip in the world. A hole in the fabric of realities. And through it is a path to my home. To Daedalus. This time Natsu didn't hold back, rushing at the man and grabbing him by his cloak. His eyes glowed with anger as he gripped the man tightly. Your world. You mean you ? Natsu. Natsu snapped out of his anger at Ichigo's call, releasing Mr. Sorry. My anger got ahead of me. I shouldn't have done that. It's fine, said Mr. brushing off the Dragon Slayer's worries. I kind of expected someone to react like that. People here wouldn't like what my world is trying to do. Well. It's not just my world. Mr. gestured towards Carla, who took a step forward, dragging Happy with her. It's ours too. Happy looked from her to Mr. and back. I'm sure I'd remember that. Would you? Happy frowned at Carla's words. You were born from an egg. You didn't see the outside world until you hatched. Even if you were hatched in Earthland, you were born in Daedalus. Mr. nodded at her statement. She's right. It's why you won't find many cats like this here. They are known as Exceed, one of the two primary races that gained intelligence in my home. They may not look very strong, and they aren't really, but they do possess a very unique quality about them in Daedalus. They can hold magic inside their bodies. Hold magic inside them. Gajeel sat himself on the ground, listening closely. Isn't that normal for most people? Maybe here, but bear in mind that this is a different dimension. Different rules exist compared to what is possible here. Humans, for example, cannot store energy inside their bodies. If Wendy was to look at them, she would see a void, just like she does with me. And that's why the magic you radiate comes from your staves, Ichigo muttered. That's been a bit of a debate some of us have been wondering about for a while now. I wouldn't have expected anything less after my fight with Laxus during those S-class trials. I assume you never worked it out. Not really. You seemed just like any ordinary person. Mr. nodded, looking as if he had won something. That's exactly it. On the outside, we're identical to the people here. Or at least biologically speaking. There can be changes to the personality, of course, and how people developed, but in Daedalus there is not a single person who uses magic in the same way as it is done here. Reaching to his back, Mistogin pulled off one of his staves and showed it to them. Lacrima to hold the magic and the stave as a conduit for it. Using these, I can fight just like a holder-type mage might, as I don't necessarily need to be able to use magic myself to fight. It's what makes up a mage in Edalis. Most of the time it acts as a way to use magic in everyday life. Mistogin now pointed towards the two Exceed. Happy and Carla here, as Exceeds, possessed the ability that humans lacked, which allowed them to survive for as long as they have. They used to have more flexibility to it, but Exceed are weaker compared to humans. In order to survive, they slowly evolved over time, their magic becoming more restrictive but becoming more innate. Would you mind, Carla? Carla huffed but quickly sprouted her wings, flying up to them from the ground. Mistogin pointed out the wings, refraining from annoying Carla by actually grabbing them. Era is a very simple magic at its core. It holds in it the dreams of the Exceed. To live. Carla spun round to face him. How do you exactly know so much about Exceed? Mistogin smiled fondly. I met some of you once. A very arrogant race, but you were seen as angels with your ability to hold magic. 3 years ago you were seen as that in fact. But a lot of things can change in 3 years, especially with what your queen did. My queen. Carla glared at him. What exactly happened? I only know a few things about Edalis, and they aren't things I want to do. Like your mission to kill the Dragon Slayers. Carla felt her blood freeze, even if it wasn't Mistogin who had said that. Happy seemed frozen as well, trying to comprehend the words. Gajeel just stared at the newcomer, and Natsu was no different, as was Toshiro. Mistogin smiled at the newcomer. You made it. That I did. I couldn't resist coming when I heard. My, this town's a bit of a mess, isn't it? Natsu made to strike the man, but someone beat him to it. Ichigo slammed a fist at the cloaked man's face, the man falling to the ground and clutching his head. Gajeel frowned at him. Didn't you tell Natsu to calm down earlier? That's not for today. That's for all the crap he put us through with Nirvana. Ichigo glanced at Wendy, seeing she had frozen in shock. You okay, Wendy? Do you know him? This guy. Ichigo reached down and pulled off the man's hood, revealing a full head of messy blonde hair. Yeah. He's my teacher. Toshiro blinked in shock. He's the one who trained you. Yeah. I see. Toshiro flung a look of pure hatred at Kisuke. So you're the one who inspired Ichigo's training routine. I thought it was normal until I met other people. You're completely heartless. Why, thank you. Kisuke turned towards Ichigo. I'm assuming Jura did inform you I was there, judging by your reaction. You can bet he did. I see. Well, nothing too bad happened in the end. Ichigo scowled. Urza's still missing an arm. Replacements can be found. Prosthetics can be made. She's still alive, isn't she? Kisuke smiled. Besides, you know what I'm like. You know how I act. I don't care for anyone who I don't see as important. She isn't one of them. Ichigo turned towards Mistogin. And what about you? Were you involved with Nirvana? Mistogin shook his head rapidly, even going as far to look disgusted at the very idea. Not at all. I didn't even know he was involved, or that he knew you. Sounds exactly like Kisuke then. Ichigo turned back to Kisuke. You're here to help, I assume? You wouldn't just turn up out of the blue without a reason. I can deal with the other stuff after we're done. Kisuke nodded, bringing a fan out of his coat and using it to hide the lower half of his face. Very well then. Let's get down to business. Start with what you know about that mission. Carla stared directly at Kisuke, not giving an inch as he returned her stare. She could swear he was smirking behind that fan of his. Mistogin slipped into this world through an anima in the first place. He didn't want to risk slipping back through due to how random the trip would have been and how hard it would be to get back to Earthland. As such, I helped him get there and back with a slightly different method. In that time, we paid the Queen a visit. She told us a few things. He glanced towards Happy. Don't feel so down. Your mission is a fake in the first place. Never existed. While Happy looked relieved, Carla couldn't believe the man's words one bit. You're lying. I remember the mission. I heard it the day I hatched. I saw it vividly. They implanted it into our minds. Kisuk laughed, and she could tell it was mocking her. Why don't you ask the queen when you meet her? She'll tell you the whole story. Turning his attention back to the rest of the group, Kisuk continued to speak. Now 3 years ago things in Edalas changed rapidly. The use of anima was perfected to a greater degree, yet its use was slowed down dramatically. Now it finally is used once more, and because of that, this attack wasn't random. Someone knew how to find Mistogan, or at least where he frequently visited. They wanted to catch him, or at least take away something close to him in an attempt to force him out of hiding. That's my hypothesis on the situation. Kisuk glanced upwards, looking at the still raging storm above them. Wendy. Is the void in the sky still there? It should be. Wendy snapped out of her daze, looking towards Ichigo for advice. Just do as he says. For now. She nodded, if somewhat reluctantly, before looking up at the sky. She could still see it there, but it would vanish soon, judging by how it slowly seemed to be shrinking. It looks to be closing. That's good, said Kisuk. It works well for us. Ichigo frowned. And how exactly will it help us? A smirk crossed Kisuk's face behind the fan, but his eyes showed how serious he was. Magnolia and everyone in it was taken into that thing. Anima works as a gathering magic. It breaks holes into this world and pulls up magic into it. Mistogan has been good at keeping it under control, but one of this size is too much for him to stop. Everything beneath it was turned into raw magic and absorbed upwards into Edalas. That's a hole into Edalas, isn't it then? Let's go after the others. It's not that simple, is it? Said Gajeel suddenly. Fairy Tail could still fight back, and they would. So why can't they? You catch on. Kisuk sighed. The magic above us is being directed into a massive lacrima on Edalas' side. It can't reform into its original state if they are moving it into storage straight away. That's why we're waiting. What are we waiting for? Mistogan answered for Kisuk, turning towards Wendy. They can close anima, but not completely. It tears a hole in the fabric between their world and ours, and it isn't closed as well as you might expect. As long as people can latch onto the remaining magic of anima at the right time, they will enter Edalas and not get caught. Getting back involves getting to the controls for anima. But why are we still here? Mistogan glanced towards at Natsu as the Dragon Slayer spoke. Why just us? Mistogan shook his head. I'm not an expert on the mechanics really. Kisuk here knows more about it, but he's not the most forthcoming. I'd tell you if it was important, muttered Kisuk. No, you wouldn't. Maybe. Mistogan shook his head again at Kisuk's antics. What I can tell you is that I know of 3 main reasons for why we all are gathered here. He raised his index finger. Number 1 is to do with Happy and Carla. As Exceed, they aren't searched for. The blast ignores them as they are already native to Edalas. He quickly raised his next finger. Reason 2 is for me. This blast was likely also meant to also drag me into it, but I am too familiar with anima. I was able to counteract the magic as it hit, stopping me from being pulled in. And the third? Asked Natsu. Well, this is a lot of speculation on my part, but you, Gajeel, Wendy and, this is the big part I am unsure of, Toshiro all have something that is the same about yourselves. Mistogan turned to look at Kisuk for confirmation. Dragon Slayers. Correct. Hey, hold up. Toshiro quickly brought the attention to himself. What exactly are you talking about here? I'm a Shinigami. Tell me, said Kisuk curiously. What is your Zanpakuto like? How does it look? Is it a real dragon? Toshiro frowned but nodded in response to Kisuk's question. Yeah. But I don't see what that has to do with anything. Did you never wonder what Mayuri did to you all those years ago? Toshiro froze, the shock of those words dragging up memories and making ice form at his feet during that brief lapse of control. What? How do you? You should be thankful for it today. You're still here, aren't you? He's a dragon slayer. Gajeel sniffed the air. He doesn't exactly smell like one. I'll admit there is a trace though, but it's weaker than the one Laxus gives off. That's only due to the potency of his Shinigami powers. So he's like me and Shinji then, said Ichigo. If we were hybrids because of our hollows, Toshiro was one because of having Dragon Slayer magic. Exactly. Far easier to bond to someone compared to a hollow when dealing with Shinigami magic. Not as strong in the long run however, hence why he was probably used to test the process and to make sure it worked without failure or death. That doesn't explain me however. Mist-Ogen turned to Ichigo in shock. You came from outside the city. Weren't you outside the anima's radius? I doubt it. I woke up on the same stuff we're standing on, and Shinji was gone despite being near me. Ichigo turned to Kisuke, seeing the glint in the man's eyes. You know, don't you? I do. Ichigo waited for a moment, seeing no more words coming. Want to share? Maybe later. You might even work it out for yourself anyway. Kisuke glared upwards, bringing out a small device from his cloak and holding it up to the sky. And it looks like we're in the clear. Time to move. Mist-Ogen quickly reached into his clothes and pulled out a small jar. Inside were tiny red pills that he quickly gained access to by removing the lid. You will need these. Each person took one before swallowing the pill. What's it do? Asked Natsu, trying not to spit the pill out from the horrid taste. It should allow you to be able to access magic in Edalis. How effective it is will be debatable. While you should be able to use the magic inside you, I can't guarantee how fast you will be able to gain magic back. You may not be able to at all. Huh. Gajeel frowned. What do you mean we may not be able to get it back? Is this thing permanent? Only in Edalis. Mist-Ogen sighed. You see that humans aren't able to release magic from the bodies as I said before. By entering Edalis, you get subjected to the same rules of magic as it believes you to be the same as the humans there. This pill you just ate flips that rule on its head in a sense. Before you would have gathered magic without being able to access it. Now you should be able to use magic but will be unable to replenish it. Don't worry, Kisuke added on. You have lots more magic than the people in Edalis anyway, even in the tools that they use. You should be fine as long as you try not to waste it. Besides, charging in guns blasting may not be the best answer straight away. It is unknown what the situation is there, but Anima is controlled by the king. He'll have the world on his side. That's all fine, said Ichigo. Can you get us to Edalis? Kisuke gestured towards the Exceed. How many people can you carry? The two Exceed looked between themselves before holding up 2 fingers each, and they looked fairly unsure on the number, especially when they considered that there were 5 of them there. This is the way most of you will take then, said Kisuke. Happy can take 2 while Carla takes the other 2. You should all be able to go the normal way except for Ichigo. I'll just fly up there. Kisuke laughed, tapping Ichigo against the head in a teasing manner. Think. Do you really assume that will work? It's because of us. Kisuke turned to Carla. As Exceed, we can make it recognize us if we fly directly up at it. It won't be able to ignore us then. Not quite. Kisuke pointed back at Ichigo. This guy created a 4th type of person who didn't get sucked into the anima. And his is a lot different than you lot. If he charges into the anima, it will likely ignore him completely. The others looked at Ichigo in concern but he waved off their worries. Just go ahead. Besides, I'm sure Kisuke has an idea of how to get me there. He went a different way, remember. Happy slowly flew over to Natsu, grabbing him by his back. Carla did the same with Gajeel, who was forced to scoop Wendy up into his arms with Carla's insistence of carrying her with them. Toshiro made to go to Natsu when Ichigo's hand fell on his shoulder. He turned to see his mentor leaning down by him, his voice kept low while the others were quickly distracted. Look after them. I believe in you to make sure things hold together till I get there. Toshiro nodded, hiding the smile he wanted to show from the faith he was being given. The happiness also managed to make him avoid protesting being carried by Natsu like a child, even if he technically was on. Ichigo stepped back to Kisuke and Mist-Ogen, all watching as the 2 Exceed took their charges and companions upwards. Kisuke was even waving as if wishing them farewell as they went on a holiday. Come back safely. Have a good time. The two Exceed shot up faster and faster as they sped towards the fading light before vanishing as they hit it. The portal didn't seem to remain open for much longer as the light finally vanished, a speck of the sky above able to be seen before the clouds hid it once more. Well then, said Ichigo, turning towards Kisuk. What do you have for me? Kisuk snapped his fingers, 4 pillars extending from a void beside him. The pillars seemed to be covered in what looked like seals on paper, covering them from head to toe. Here's your ticket there. What the hell is this? Mist Ogden stepped back a bit as Kisuk stepped forward to explain, not understanding a lot of how the thing worked himself. This is an invention of my own after learning of the existence of other dimensions. I wondered how Anima was capable of bridging the gap between Earthland and Edalis, and I was forced to come up with a method of my own if I wanted to visit. And what exactly is it? Kisuk paused for dramatic effect, closing his fan and pointing it at the gate. This is the Senkaimon. A Senkaimon. Yep. Nice name, isn't it? I've been considering making a fancier version of this, though their composition and instability doesn't allow me to move them easily. Kisuk's expression turned serious once more as he continued. This will allow you to access the realm between dimensions. Something known as the Danga or the Precipice World. So far it all sounds simple enough. Oh, it is. But it isn't the safest route. You see, the Danga is more than just space between the two. It's time as well. Or I should say lost time perhaps, as it takes the form of some deadly currents there. The Kuryuo, or resting flow, and the Kautosu, or resting surge, are used to keep people out. Technically people shouldn't be able to pass through as they do. Anima actually acts as a beacon and a method of safe transport, as it gives them a protective shield around those caught in it. The Danga doesn't just connect our world to theirs after all. It is the space between all worlds. Kisuk glanced at the portal. Listen closely here. The Kuryuo takes shape as the walls around you, flowing as the name might suggest. If you touch it, you'll get trapped by it and won't be able to escape. It'll slowly pull you in and you'll vanish into them and get destroyed. Don't use any magic in there either. Do so and it'll drag you into it. So I'll be fine as long as I avoid the walls. What about the Kautosu? That's the more dangerous aspect. Due to being composed of time too, it doesn't want anything else there. The Kautosu is the equivalent of a sweeper, clearing away the unwanted things in that world. You'll know when it's coming. It has a bright yellow light at the front of it. Again, don't let it touch you. It's connected to the Kuryu as well. So run away from it. Anything else? Kisuk shook his head. Not really. This seals here should help with stabilizing the portal as best as they can, and I'll be managing it from this side too. Getting back will be the easier part in a way, though I'll leave Mist Ogden to explain that to you when you two get there. Ichigo glanced at Mist Ogden in shock. You're coming too? Why didn't you say? Taoshiro could have flown up if need be. I didn't want to leave you alone in Edalis, Mist Ogden answered. Natsu and the others will be okay together, but I don't like the idea of leaving anyone on their own. Who knows what could happen? Kisuk coughed into his hands, drawing the attention back to him. That's all you should need to know. Well then, are you ready? I can give you only 4 minutes. That's all the time I can give you with the portal. Once I open it, run. Just run. The gateway is linked on both sides, you see. If the portal closes before you make it, you'll be trapped in there forever. This gate doesn't have the charge for a second use without complete reconstruction of every seal on it. We make it, said Ichigo confidently. You made it before, right? We used a more permanent version, stated Mist Ogden. It gave us some more time since it would stay open as long as we wanted it to. Still, you wouldn't be going through with this if 4 minutes wasn't enough time. No, I wouldn't. Ichigo looked back at Kisuk. Then let's go then. Kisuk pressed his hand against the ground by the portal and the area enclosed within the pillars glowed bright blue. Get ready. Ichigo and Mist Ogden took places in front of the Senkaimon, preparing to run. Kisuk looked at them before nodding. Go. The light turned bright white as the two leapt forward, vanishing just as the portal stabilized itself to a flowing white light. Kisuk looked at the portal before he continued, focusing at the task at hand. Good luck, Ichigo. The moment Ichigo and Mistogin found themselves in the danga, they kept running. They had little time to pay attention to the place or glance at the purple flowing walls, having to spend all their focus on running straight ahead. 4 minutes might not be enough if they didn't hurry. So they ran and ran and ran. They couldn't keep track of how much time had passed, but they knew they didn't have much left. But they could definitely see a speck of light in the distance. Just a bit further. Mistogin suddenly felt a terrible sense of unease, glancing over his shoulder and looking back. It was then he spotted the flash of yellow light heading towards them. It's the Kautosu. Ichigo glanced back. Damn it. Keep moving. We're almost there. Mistogin nodded, facing forward again as they both put on as much speed as possible. They could hear it getting closer, however, but it wouldn't matter. They were almost there. It was all going well until Mistogin tripped, the man falling as fear crossed his face. Ichigo stopped, turning back and grabbing the man. The Kautosu was too close now though. It was almost on top of them. Ichigo didn't have time to get Mistogin on his feet, instead running with the man on his shoulder. But the additional weight was slowing him down. And Mistogin could see that. Let me go. No way. Do it or we'll both die. The others will need you more than me. What the hell kind of crap are you saying? Ichigo's head snapped round to his. I'm not letting anyone die here. Make sure they'll okay. Make sure they're okay. Mistogin's eyes widened as he realized what Ichigo was about to do. Wait, don't dash. Ichigo didn't listen, throwing the man forward as strongly as he could. He saw Mistogin reach the portal and pass through it. That only left him. He was almost there. His hand reached out towards it and was about to hit the edge when it happened. The Kautosu touched him. Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.